that contest.
Entertain
We're the first
and
one that
educate
you saw.
young minds
So
by
I'm going to
infusing
turn this off
concepts
now,
of
but
healthy living,
I wanted to give
social
a plug.
responsibility and environmental awareness within a creative board games. Green
Okay, welcome back. Did everybody have a nice lunch? Everybody meet at least 5 people they didn't know before? Okay. I again have the pleasure of welcoming you all this afternoon, and I especially have the pleasure of introducing 2 people that I've worked with for some time. Steve Highlander, longer than Tamara Kale. Steve Highlander and Tamara Kale are both with Fulbright and Jaworski, and they're in the intellectual property department there, and they're the outside counsel that the University of Texas Pan American works with. And they're going to share a little bit about what you all need to know as an entrepreneur for intellectual property issues. And Steve is a partner in the firm's intellectual property department, where he focuses on emerging technologies, especially biotechnology, and he covers the whole gamut of issues related to intellectual property. And Tamara is an associate in the office in Austin, and her background is in organic chemistry and cell biology, and she focuses in new technologies. She's a member of the Texas Bar and is also admitted to practice before the USPTO office, as is Steve Highlander. And they both maybe will explain a little bit. They have to have PhDs, or at least a strong science background, before they can get law degrees, so that's how come they can understand so much about technology. So without further ado, I will let the 2 of them take over and start the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jackie. We have a pretty big challenge facing us in the next hour. So one is to follow that great presentation from Corey, which I found really excellent framing of the issues from entrepreneurship from the university standpoint. The other is to cover a lot of material. As Tamara and I were preparing last night, we started scratching our heads going, how are we all going to get through all of this in an hour and 15 minutes? And I really would like to allow some time at the end so that you guys can ask some questions, because I think that's where a lot of the benefit's going to come here. So forgive us if we blow through some slides really quickly. We want to hit the high points and then save some time so we can talk specifics with you guys. It works. So there's really 4 kinds of IP that people talk about, intellectual property. The first will be the focus mainly of our talk today, which is patents. And patents give the right to exclude others. And this is going to be an emphasis of another slide that's coming up very quickly. And that is that patents don't give you the affirmative right to do anything. And this is one of the major misconceptions. If you get a patent on a new carburetor, that doesn't give you the right to build a carburetor. There may be patents that cover gaskets and valves that go into the carburetor, and if those patents preclude you from practicing those inventions, you have no affirmative right to build your carburetor. So what it does is it gives you the right to exclude others. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This is a time-limited exclusion. It's 20 years from your first effective filing date of your patent application. So it ends in a period of time, but over that time, you're given this right of exclusivity to operate and to exclude others from a particular area. Trademarks, of course, are a very different kind of thing. It's an association of a good or a service with a particular provider. And the nice thing about trademarks is that they're potentially indefinite. As long as the trademark retains its uniqueness, it's associated with a particular source of goods or service, it can go on indefinitely. What happens is that things lose their uniqueness over time. The term escalator used to be a trademark. That was a brand name for a moving stairway. But over time, it became genericized, and all moving stairways became known as escalators. And therefore, the trademark protection was lost because it no longer identified the particular goods and service. But it's potentially very long-lived. Copyrights are also different. They relate specifically to literal copying. And again, they're very long-lived depending on if they're original for an author or if they're a work for hire. But they are long-lived. The problem is they're very narrow. So if you, for example, take a computer software, computer program, if someone can't copy the literal code, if it's protected by copyright protection, but they can rewrite the code so that it does effectively the same thing, and it's not copyright infringement. So a lot of times copyright in the context of software will be coupled with patent protection because they really protect different aspects of the IP. And then finally there's trade secrets, and trade secrets are extremely powerful in the sense that they're also indefinite and they're absolute. People can't practice what they don't know. But it's not good for technology that can be reverse engineered. For example, if it's a very simple subject matter that could be subjected to an analysis that would let you know exactly what was in the composition of matter, that wouldn't be good to try to keep that as a trade secret. You'd be better off protecting it with a patent, at least for 20 years, because if it's a trade secret, people are going to figure it out very quickly. Now, there are good trade secrets that are still used, like, for example, Listerine and the formula for Coca-Cola are held as trade secrets, and people still don't know what they are. And that's part of the process of making that, even though if you could figure out what's there in the end, you don't really know how to make it. So from now on, we're going to talk about patents, but that's just to give you a little background on the general areas of intellectual property. Now, as I mentioned, one of the big misconceptions about patents is that it doesn't give you the right to practice anything affirmatively. It gives you the right to exclude others. And I like to analogize this to maybe the property right to your house. You get a deed to the house and your property that the house sits on. That wouldn't give you the right to build a skyscraper there, right, in a residential neighborhood, because there's a superior right, or at least an overlapping right that the city would have to tell you what you can and can't do on your property. Maybe your homeowners association would have the same thing. You can't build a brick building on the property. So it gives you the right to throw people off your property, but it doesn't give you necessarily the right to do anything affirmatively. So people say, oh, I've got a patent, now I can practice that invention without any concern. Not at all. You'd have to do what was called a freedom to operate analysis and to find out whether there were other patents out there that might impact what you wanted to do commercially. Remember, an invention and a commercial endeavor are two different things. They may be almost the same, they may overlap somewhat, or they may be very, very tangentially related. So if you take one thing home today, it's that getting a patent doesn't give you the affirmative right to do anything. It gives you the right to exclude others from doing what your patent states. Mentioned the 20-year exclusivity, and again, it's measured from the first filing date that you make for a patent application. It's not from when your patent issues. It used to be that patents had 17-year term from when they issued. Now it's the first effective filing date that you make for a patent application. So if it takes you 10 years to get your patent to issue, once it issues, you've only got 10 years of patent protection left. So we talk about patents. Patents cover inventions. What are inventions? Well, inventions have to fall into a statutory category, which would be compositions, methods, or articles of manufacture. People will come to me and say, well, I have an idea, I want a patent. Well, an idea isn't really patentable. A general concept of doing something is not patentable. It has to be translated into a meaningful composition, a meaningful method or process, or a meaningful machine or article of manufacture. Those are the only categories that are recognized for patentability in the United States. An invention must then satisfy 3 statutory criteria. It must be novel. In some way, it must be different than what's been done by others in the past. It may not be a big difference, but it has to be different to be novel. So getting over the novelty hurdle usually isn't that big a deal. It's rare that I have an inventor come to me and say, well, here's my invention, and we find out later that it's completely one-on-one with the prior art. The bigger problem comes from whether or not the difference between what's been done, we would call the prior art, is non-obvious or whether it's obvious. So the question is the difference in the prior art trivial? Would it be something that anybody would think of? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Finally, the invention must be useful. And there are different kinds of patents, but the patents that generally people think about, that I think we're all talking about today, are called utility patents, and it's because they're covered for useful inventions. This is, again, is generally not a big hurdle to get over. If it's something worth patenting, generally there's some use to it that can be applied. There are 2 parts to an invention, and this is important for establishing things like inventorship and when your invention was made. The first part of invention is we call conception. And conception is sort of the light bulb paradigm. The light bulb goes off and you have this, concept in your mind of what the invention is going to be and how it's going to be used. It must be complete. It must not have enough moving parts that you couldn't give it to someone who's just, not an inventor, but just sort of a person of ordinary skill. and that they would be able to practice it without their own inventive activity, that's when you have a full conception. But if what would be required is additional inventive thought to get it to the point where you can actually use the invention, then your conception's not complete. So it would be a complete conception of the invention as it's to be made and used, and it can be reproduced by others without their own inventive activity. And then, of course, reduction to practice would be the actual making of the composition, the practicing of the process, the building of the machine. That's what's called reduction to practice. And that can be either actual, where it's done physically with your hands, or it can be constructive. And that's when you put all the information that you would need to do it into a patent application. All right? So you can have, those are two different forms of reducing the invention to practice. Now, it's really important in this process of thinking and conceiving and reducing to practice that you record what you're doing. There are a number of legal disputes, inventorship disputes, who was the first to invent something, that will rely on invention records. Your inability to go back and show accurate and corroborated documentation of what you did and when can end up costing you all of your rights. So one of the things we'd like to drill home today is, as you're in the process of making your invention, you need to think about your ability to record the events, the studies, even the concepts, jotting down, I had this idea and I think it's going to play out this way. Any kind of information relating to your invention record and having it written down is extremely important. The information should be as detailed as possible and should focus both on the conception and the reduction to practice, even if they're unsuccessful, because it's showing activity, which is also important. We say that the best way to do this is to use bound notebooks, not loose leaf or spiral, but bound so they can't be easily doctored, consecutively numbered pages, and consecutively numbered notebooks in a series, and you can buy these. And so if you're recording them, it's very clear that you've done things in consecutive fashion and you haven't gone back and inserted things. And if possible, have someone who's familiar with the technology but wouldn't be an inventor, a co-inventor with you. Have them review these notebooks on a regular basis, sign them and date them, so that if 10 years from now we need to come back and prove this, even if they don't remember, they can look and say, yeah, well, I read this. It says I read on this day, November 22nd, 2008, signed, Jane Smith. I don't remember it exactly, but that's my signature, and if I wrote that, it means I read it and I understood it. That would be good enough to corroborate that was in existence on that day. Very critical to the success in defending your invention or defending your inventorship at a later time. Now, mention inventorship. How do we determine who's an inventor? Is it you? Is it some other people that have contributed, helped you? Where does the line between, collaboration and getting materials, just friendly conversation, when does that stop and when does inventorship begin? Well, the threshold question for determining inventorship, and this is actually case-made definition. There is no statute that defines inventorship. The question is whether or not this person contributed to the conception of the invention. This is the complete formation. So unless a person contributes to that conception, he or she is not an inventor, and whether or not they participate in a reduction to practice is technically irrelevant. But what I often say is, it's interesting to look at what happened during reduction to practice, because if it turned out you had a conception and you went to apply it, this person of presumably just ordinary skill couldn't get it to work because the conception was complete, the information about what happened during reduction to practice, namely failure, tells you something about the inadequacies of your conception. So the conception wasn't complete. So then maybe you came back and fixed it and you were still the sole inventor because you completed the conception. But maybe that person who ran the experiment, showed it didn't work, said, maybe if I turn this around or increase the temperature 5 degrees and then it works, they completed the conception and now they're a co-inventor, right? So conception is the touchstone, but don't deny looking at reduction to practice because it may be instructive. The other thing to remember about inventorship is it goes off what is the claimed invention. Okay, so it's not just what the activities were. You have to focus in on what your property right is, what you're going to be asking for. What does the claim look like? And in fact, what is likely to be patentable, right? So sometimes we are a little overly aggressive when we file our patent applications because if you don't ask for it, you'll never get it, right? But in assessing inventorship, what we want to try to do is look at what's likely to be the claim that issues here, right? And if you're trying to figure out who should be an inventor, you need to look at what's likely to issue as a claim. And of course, examining conception, reduction to practice. Timing is also very important. And so again, you go back to the notebooks, right? Having them recorded in a particular order, the date they're dated, and they're countersigned. Because if I thought of something today and you thought of it 3 weeks from now, in 6 years, that kind of, that difference is going to get blurred. 3 weeks, 6 years ago. But it makes a difference. And so timing is very critical. And again, who's the lead here? Who's giving the instructions? Who's the one doing the follow-up? All of these things will end up impacting the analysis. Again, going back to the record keeping. The good thing to know is that if you get it wrong and it's accidental, it's not intentional, it was a mistake, a misunderstanding about what inventorship was or about what someone had done, we can correct it. Even after the patent issues, you can correct inventorship. But it has to be no deceptive intent. So you can't play hide the ball and then when you get caught, fix it. That's going to be a problem. And generally speaking, when you're talking about within a university, all of the rights are going to flow to the university. So it doesn't matter if there's 2 or 3 or 4 people. We want to get it right, but over-inclusion is generally not a big deal. It's when you start bringing people in from outside that can be a problem, because what you're doing then is you're dividing the ownership. So if you have a relationship with the University of Mississippi or something, and there's an inventor on that case, they now own half the application. So you will want to think very hard, and we'll have a slide about this later, about collaborations, because you can dilute inventorship by adding inventors. But we have to, so you can't you dilute ownership by adding inventors. But the important thing is we have to get it right or the patent could be invalid. Now we're going to blow through as quickly as possible some, oops. Yeah, okay. Can you get back up one? So we're going to blow through the statutory criteria for patentability, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tamara, who's going to talk a little bit about the requirements of the application, how the application is drafted, and some sort of details about prosecution. Now, I give a talk similar to this for the Association of University Technology Managers about once a year. This slide generally takes about 20 minutes to go through, because it's a very complicated slide. We obviously don't have the luxury of that today. Section 102 defines both criteria for establishing the novelty of an invention, but it also defines what are the things that will be considered as prior art, things that can come into play in determining whether or not your invention is new. And there's really one or two important things to take away from this slide. One is that there's a number of different categories of prior art. There's things that are patented, published, known by the public, used by the public, there's on sale bars, and then there's prior inventions, okay? So that's one thing. There's all these different things that can come in as prior art against you. The other thing is it can be either others, and you'll see on 3 of these 4 statutory criteria, it's talking about actions or events or documents that come from others. But one of them, the second one, has no mention of others. What does that mean? It means that you can create prior art for your later filed applications. So don't think if it's something that came from your lab or from your mouth that it can't come back to bite you, because it can. The other final point is to say that there's 2 time frames that are referenced in this slide. One is before your invention was made. It doesn't have anything to do with when your patent was filed, but if an action was taken by another person before you made your invention, the conception and reduction of practice, that will come in as prior art against you and can defeat the novelty of your application. But if something happened more than 1 year before your filing date, so not before your invention, but more than 1 year before your filing date, and it can be you or another person, that will then become prior art against you. All right? So I could spend, like I said, at least half an hour delving into the details of this slide, but the important thing is to remember that bars to novelty are when there is an exact identity in the prior art with your invention. That will be what's called a rejection for lack of novelty or anticipation, and you will not get a patent. But Section 102 also serves double duty, which is defining the universe of prior art. And the reason that's important is because there's another prior art hurdle we have to get over, and that's this question of obviousness or non-obviousness. We go back and we look at those same categories of prior art that we just looked at for Section 102, these prior publications, prior patent applications, on sale, whatever. But there's a difference. It's not the same thing, so your claim is novel, but there's some difference, and the question is that difference significant enough that we're going to give you a patent for it? And generally speaking, obviousness is really whether or not the change is too trivial so that anybody in the field would think of that as kind of a common thing. And if that's the case, why would we give you a patent? You're not being innovative, right? You're just doing what everybody would think. And in that, you would be required to show in the prior art a teaching of each element of what's in your invention, motivation to modify the prior art to arrive at what you're now claiming, and then a likelihood of success in doing that. And this is a fertile ground for argument within the Patent Office. I would venture to say that, 90% of all cases we file, there's a question of obviousness, and you argue this out. And generally speaking, the one where we have the best traction is C. That while it might have been a logical thing to take a shot at, it wasn't clear that it was going to work. It was empirical to do the experiment and to find out whether or not there was success. Generally speaking, the hard one to argue is motivation. There's been some recent case law with respect to that says, motivation doesn't have to be that significant. As long as there's a general feeling that that's a desirable thing to do, motivation is going to be found. So if you're looking for success in arguing this point, likelihood of success or lack of likelihood of success is going to be the one that you're likely to have the best result with. But even if all of those things are found, each element in the art, motivation, and a likelihood of success, you can still overcome a rejection for obviousness by showing what are called secondary considerations. It's kind of a rebuttal. You say, look, okay, you got me. It appears obvious on its face, but one or more of these different categories will come into play and counter this otherwise prima facie obviousness. One of them would be commercial success. Hey, people are willing to pay lots of money for my invention or license it at very favorable rates. That's an important indicator that there's value there, and value is going to be a surrogate for patentability. There was a long felt need. The field, has been looking for this for years. Nothing's happened. People have been trying it for years and failed and failed and failed, yet we were able to succeed. There are unexpected advantages flowing from the result. Not only does it work, it works better, than anybody could have ever imagined. It gets a tenfold over what you could have predicted, even though the base invention looks obvious. Or finally, it may look obvious now that we did it, but it took us years and years and years of toil, and it was very hard to accomplish. All of those things can come back and kind of trump the obviousness. So as long as you get out of the novelty box, as we say, as long as there's some difference, you have a fighting chance, right? If you've got no differences, it's endgame, and you might as well not even file your patent. But if you're in the obviousness realm, you've at least got an argument, a colorable argument that you can make. And then finally, there's utility. I mentioned this before. We're talking about utility patents here. Generally speaking, this is not a problem. You only need some practical utility. The case I like to cite is I think it's an 1872 Supreme Court case about slot machines, and the Supreme Court held that there was utility in a slot machine by virtue of the entertainment factor of playing a slot machine. I thought that was kind of an odd. I would have said that the owner of the slot machine would say making money was the utility, but it's clear that the utility standard is one of the most easily satisfied. There are some specific exclusions, things that basically people know don't work. They're basically, perpetual motion machines, the laws of physics say that they don't work. And so there's just an exclusion for things like that. And then finally, you do see these sometimes where you're talking about maybe a methodologic result that's so outrageous that people just find it unbelievable on its face. So for example, curing what are otherwise thought to be incurable diseases. Like if I filed a claim that said I can cure HIV infections, that would be probably rejected for lack of utility, and they would demand that we show evidence that that could be achieved because it's just it's considered impossible scientifically at this point. So you have a very high burden then to show that you can satisfy the utility requirement in those sort of situations. So that's the statutory requirement for the claims. There are now additional requirements for the specification itself, and Tamara's going to start off talking about that.
Hi there. So just to be clear, in a patent application, claims come at the very end. If you picked up a patent application or a patent, claims are written at the very end. They're numbered sentences, and they define the property right of your invention. The specification is all the stuff that comes before. And so some of the things that I'll be talking about refer to what you need to put in the patent application besides just the claims. So there's some statutory requirements regarding what are called enablement and written description. So the first one up there, enablement, requires that a patent application teach how to make and use the full scope of the claimed invention. So why is this even a requirement? Well, the deal you make when you file a patent application is you tell the public how to make and use an invention, even though you're going to have an exclusionary right to that, to exclude others people from using it for 20 years. At the end of that 20 years, your right stops, and that material is dedicated to the public. And so you have to convey your invention in a way such at the end of that 20 years, the public can practice your invention. So that's kind of the deal that you make. So you have to teach how to make and use it. When it comes to teaching, you wonder, well, how much do I have to put in this application to teach? So the target audience is a person of skill in your field. So you don't have to start from basic principles and make your patent application 500 pages long just to get to the very basics. You want to explain to someone such that when you hand your application over to somebody, they can make and use it, and they know the basic principles of the art that you're in. When it comes to the full scope, an example we can use is, let's say you have a claim to a method of treating cancer comprising administering to a patient a compound of a certain formula. So if you're going to enable that full scope, a method of treatment of cancer, so you have to describe the cancer. You have to pick and choose which cancers you're going to be treating. When you talk about the patient, you'd kind of think humans, but maybe your initial testing is with rats or rabbits, so you want to describe those as well. And administering, you have to describe how you administer that compound. Injection or a patch or a pill. And then the compound of formula X, you have to explain to someone how to make that compound. So there's a pretty broad spectrum, and so that's why patent applications often get kind of hefty, is because you're trying to explain to people how to make and use your invention. So coming up next is written description, and this requires evidence in the application of possession of the invention as claimed. So that's kind of fuzzy. Possession, like, do I possess it? What does that mean? It really comes down, at least historically, to the words in your application. So if you had a claim to cancer, and you list some cancers in your application, colon and pancreatic and breast cancer. Let's say you later wanted leukemia, but you didn't actually have that word in your application. You could not try to amend your claims to get leukemia because you did not actually have that word in there. It didn't show that you possessed that idea at the time you filed. You can't really add it later in, like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. So when you file, you really have to think broadly, okay, how can I use this invention? How are other people going to use it? That's a really key question. How are people going to try to work around what I've done? And so you try to describe all these ways that your invention could be employed, and you try to describe them. About 15 years ago or so, the written description field has started to kind of blend with enablement a little bit, and there's one key case where someone described a rat insulin gene, and they got claims to mammalian insulin genes. And so someone came along and said, whoa, I don't think you've described all mammals. Like, you've described this rat gene, but how can you get all mammalian? They even had a claim to human genes. Like, how can you say that you possessed that? And the court actually decided that they didn't, because even though they kind of functionally described, like, hey, we know how to make this human gene, they didn't actually describe what it looked like. And so they got shot down on written description. So the final thing is usually not too much of a problem. It's a requirement in US law to divulge the best mode for making and using your invention. And so you just, again, it's the kind of deal you make, like you have to show how to make and use your invention in a way. So you want to explain the best ways that you have to do that. Thanks. All right, so when you're prosecuting in front of the patent office, there's what's called a duty of candor, and it's called Rule 56, and applicants must disclose all material relevant information to the USPTO. So what is material and relevant information? So it's anything that you think that the patent examiner just might want to know about when he's looking at your patent application. The big category is prior art, people in your field that are doing what you're doing, something similar. So you'll want to submit that to the patent office. It can also include data, so there are times where it might be appropriate for you to submit experiments that didn't work. Like, I claim that this broad genus of compounds work to cure cancer, but then you kind of find that, oh wow, there's kind of this subclass that doesn't work. You might want to disclose that to the patent examiner, because he might want to know if your whole broad claim is not enabled. There's also times where you can file declarations, as Steve was saying, those secondary considerations as you fight back and forth with the patent office about whether your invention is obvious or not. You might file a declaration from someone that says X or Y or Z. Well, you have to identify if that declarant is involved somehow with the application, if that person's an inventor, if that person worked in the lab that the inventor worked in, or is an assignee and might have a financial interest. You want to tell the patent office that, so you're not trying to hide anything. So you submit this sort of information, typically in an information disclosure statement that you file with the patent office, and you can do this throughout the life of the prosecution of your patent. Violation is called inequitable conduct, which requires both materiality and intent. So if it's just an accident and you hadn't even seen this particular document before, you're all right, but otherwise your patent could be rendered unenforceable under litigation, and so it's quite, you want to do the right thing, right? So you'll want to disclose it. If it's, usually our default setting is if you think it should be disclosed, you probably should. It's an ongoing duty that continues until issuance, and if new art is discovered after you've issued it, you don't have a duty to disclose it, but there are other routes and other reasons why you might want to engage in what's called a re-examination of your patent, to have the patent office look at it one more time in view of this new art that you might have found. So, next up is when it comes to determining whether or not you even want to file a patent in the first place, you might want to do a patentability assessment, and we usually recommend that to some degree or another. Usually it's not a market assessment, but it's an analysis of prior art and enablement. And what I mean by that is, it's been previously talked about when you're starting up a new business, you want to find out if there's a market for it. Well, that's not really what the patent question comes down to. So if you ask one of us to do a patentability assessment, we're not going to go into the financial side of the things, but we're going to look typically in the prior art for the novelty and the obviousness questions that Steve has talked about. So how we do that is we look at something that the inventor has written up, an invention disclosure maybe that's submitted to a technology transfer office in a university. It might be a journal article that's been prepared for publication, but just they haven't submitted it yet, but we can get an idea of what's going on. And we might have some discussions with the inventor as well about what the heart of the invention is. And then next up are search options. So there's a variety of options for doing searches and a variety of costs. And sometimes it comes down to how much money you might have or how much time you might have. So that includes just keyword searching, either in just generally publicly available databases or databases that like our firm or a lot of other firms have access to. It might be I do chemical structure searching using chemical structure databases. There's protein gene databases that look at sequences of nucleic acids and proteins. So we can do those in-house. Sometimes we farm them out to actual searching agencies that have a variety of databases, and we can tell them a certain dollar limit to stay under. So there's lots of options there. After we get the results, you might want to do an inventor conference to talk about what was found, see what the inventor thinks, they might say, oh yeah, I know this person did this, but 2 weeks later a paper came out and what they said had worked actually hadn't, that sort of thing. And then when it comes to talking about the patentability after doing all this analysis, you can either have a written or oral patentability report. Written is nice because it provides a record for future review, but there's a question if that patent ever comes into litigation, if that particular report can be disclosed to the other side, the opposing counsel. So it comes down to whether the report is privileged or not, and that can kind of go either way. So that's a little bit of a question mark. Oral is nice, it's pretty quick, get it over with, but then you have no record of it, and As you know, people, come and go from law firms and technology transfer offices, et cetera, so you just don't have that record to rely on. So next up is when do I file? And there's really no easy answer, unfortunately. It takes a lot of just considerations of a variety of factors. Is disclosure imminent? So as Steve was saying, there's reasons why you might want to watch out when you disclose something, because in one particular case you have a year. So in the US, if you disclose your invention publicly, you have a year to file a patent application on that. It's a grace period, but not all countries do that. So in some cases, if you disclose your invention, your foreign rights are lost. And so it's a very dangerous situation if patent protection is what you want. So is disclosure imminent? Is there sufficient data? Do you even have enough data to enable your invention? Is there likely to be new data in the coming weeks or the next year? As I'll talk about in a minute, one of the types of applications you can file is a provisional application, where you file it and 1 year later, and it's never examined by the patent office, but 1 year later you convert it to a non-provisional application. In that year's time, you can pick up new information, synthesize new compounds, find out more information, and when you convert in a year, you can add that information in. So thinking about how things are progressing has an impact on when you file. Is there a market? That is a factor. And sometimes you'll want to file an application to block a competitor. Sometimes you're not interested in pursuing something at that time, but you want to stop others from doing it. You might want to file an application at that time. So next up is the parts of the application. I'll just blow through this pretty quickly. Title page, there's a background section, and usually there you kind of set up the problem that you're trying to solve with your invention. Summary of invention, that actually pertains namely to the claims. So down there a little bit, those numbered sentences at the very end of the application, what you do is you take those and kind of put them in sentence form, prose form, up in the summary in the invention. So there's written description that way for your claims. The brief description of the drawings and the drawings themselves, so you can put drawings in applications, certainly for mechanical, electrical ones, that's important, but you can put figures, assay data. Detailed description of the invention. This is the heart of the application, and where you really describe how to make and use it, and you kind of weave your way around. This is where you can talk about what others might do. When you try to think broadly about how others might use your invention, you want to put that in the detailed description, so you really describe how your invention could be made or used, not necessarily by you, but perhaps by others. The claims and abstract. In the abstract, you want to be careful and try to put in keywords, because some databases are tied to abstracts, and so you'll want to put in keywords in there that someone can find your patent application or patent if they're searching for it. And some applications require sequences, like nucleic acid sequences, to be disclosed, as well as computer programs. So the application process, if you want to do that patentability report, you sure can, and then you go ahead with preparing the application and file it with the U.S. Patent Office. You can electronically file now, which is pretty slick. Sometimes one of the first things that the Patent Office will do is issue you what's called a restriction requirement. So sometimes when you draft up your claims, the Patent Office will think you're trying to claim more than one invention in one application. So you're allowed one invention per patent. So a classic example is I claim this compound and I claim a method of using this compound. So very often the Patent Office will say, I think those are two different inventions, and they'll make you split them into two different applications, which of course is a moneymaker for the PTO. But anyway, so you'll have to prosecute those separately. So that's what's called a restriction requirement. An election of species is sometimes what they ask you to do to help them get started with searching your invention. So anyway, after you take care of that, what'll come along is an office action, and that's the first opportunity that you have to really see what the Patent Office thinks of your patent, and it's typically a rejection of your patent. I don't think I've gotten any first action allowances.
I've gotten 2 in 16 years.
So they usually find something that they don't like. So you go back and forth, you file responses where you might amend your claims, you might argue, you might file some of that secondary consideration evidence that Steve talked about. An advisory action is just a special type of office action. And if you're not happy with the way things are going, you can appeal and get a different audience to look at your arguments. And hopefully that results in allowance and issuance. You might file what's called a continuation application. So in the next slide, there's a discussion of the types of applications. So the one that a lot of people know about is the provisional application. So like I said, this is one that you can file where in a year's time you can develop more data and solidify your ideas more concretely, so that 1 year from then you file what's called a non-provisional application, and that's the one that's examined. So you know how I talked about the restriction requirement, how sometimes you'll have to split your invention or split your application into two. When that happens, that new application is called a divisional application. A continuation application is one where you get some claims to your invention, but you kind of look through your application and think, wait, you know, there's kind of another invention buried in here that I want to claim. So you can file a continuation application and kind of mine your application for other inventions that might be in there. And then it's a whole new application, so you're not claiming two in one, you file a separate one. A continuation in part is another type of continuation application where you might add new information. It's kind of a long story what a continuation part is, but we don't do those very often. And then reissues and reexaminations. A reissue is done if there's some mistake in an issued patent. There's certain corrections you can make either by a certificate of correction, just tell the patent office, whoops, I made a typo. But some other types of corrections require a reissue. And a re-exam happens when, as I mentioned before, usually if art comes along that you're like, ugh, I didn't know about this before, and now I want the patent office to look at my patent one more time in view of this art. And what's interesting about re-exams is that you can file that re-exam, or a third party can. A third party can go and look for art and make a case to the patent office that your patent needs to be re-examined. So the last slide here that I'll be talking about is about the provisional system. And as I mentioned, it's a kind of a placeholder. Really, it starts the clock, it actually doesn't start the clock ticking, but at least gets on record that you have an invention, and in a year's time, you can gather more data. It does have the same requirements for enablement and written description that I talked about before. So if you try to just be kind of skimpy in your provisional application, and then a year, you bulk it up and file, it may be that you don't get the benefit of that, it's called the benefit of the priority date of the provisional, because you just didn't describe it very well the first time around. It does allow for updating over the span of the year. Like I said, you can add in more data at the end of which a non-provisional is filed, but really, like I mentioned, it's really only good for what's in the provisional application. So you really want to be careful and think most thoroughly at the time of the filing of the provisional. So Steve's next going to talk about some strategies about filing and prosecuting.
Yeah, and just a final word on the provisional. The provisional is a very valuable tool. As I said, it allows you, or Tamara said, it allows you to get a filing date for what you have. But one of the common misconceptions is that you can build on that provisional and have the building get the effective filing date of the provisional application. Let me just give you an example. Let's say you have a faculty member and he does an experiment where he treats leukemia cells with a new compound. And I'm going to publish the information, she says, and we need to file a patent application. So we quickly file a provisional application on leukemia cells treated with X. Then that publishes. Then at the end of the year, she says, oh, and I've done a bunch more experiments. I've now treated breast cancer and lung cancer and glioma. And so we file a patent application that has all of those in there, as well as the term generally cancer. All right. So the first claim gets prosecuted, and it's a claim to cancer generally. A valid rejection from the examiner might be that claim to cancer generally, it's a genus claim, right? It's generic, only gets the benefit of the non-provisional date because all you had as of your provisional date was leukemias, right? We say, well, okay, what does that matter? Well, it means that prior art that came into existence after your provisional filing, but before your non-provisional filing, would now come in against you. You'd measure the prior art against your non-provisional date, not your provisional date. So it's a common misconception that if you get a species in your provisional and then you later genericize or put other species in your non-provisional, that you still get your provisional filing date. It's not the case. And so that's why we constantly tell people, that's a data issue right there. And there's not much you can do about it if you're going to publish. You file on what you have, and maybe you try to prophetically go after other things, but it still may be you don't get your filing date. The problem that's more manageable is a client comes in and says, oh, file a provisional, and I don't want to spend more than $500. Just write 3 claims and file it. And I'll say, no, wait a minute. You want that application to be worth something in a year when you convert it. The problem is if we dump in all of the good supporting information, the enabling disclosure that Tamara talked about, if we dump all that in a year, but we don't put it in the provisional, that provisional application is going to be basically null. They're not going to be able, again, you're not going to be able to get back to your priority date, your provisional date, because you didn't put the time and money and effort in it there. So just something to think about when it comes to how much effort you put into a provisional. It's a useful process, but don't assume that it can do more than it really can. All right, so strategies. This is, I can spend an hour and a half on strategies, but I'm trying to break this down into 2 categories. One is strategies for the application. The first is what I call a foundational patent or application that makes or breaks a company. Basically, you pull out all the stops. You know that in order to get funding for your company, in order to create a really strong initial position for your company, you need to file a really strong patent application. And these cost money. We put extra effort into these, if you will, because we know that it's a make or break situation. All right? You have to be ready to pony up the big bucks for this. Follow-on patents that are progressively narrower. As I mentioned, it's hard to disclose a species and then later broaden to a genus. If the species is out there as prior art, even though you file the species application, even your own work on that species will come in later and defeat the novelty of your genus. So while they're not identical, basically, if I say cancers, and there's an example in the prior art of leukemia, that's a cancer. It defeats the novelty of a claim to cancers. And that's why, generally speaking, you start out broad and you narrow. Classic example where they do this is in chemical practice. People will start out with a very broad chemical genus and say, here are a bunch of compounds, we think they're good as herbicides. And then as time goes on, they find more and more refined structures that weren't defined specifically in the original application. They were just part of this very large genus. But you can go that direction. As long as you narrow as you go along, get more specific, you can file follow-on applications. Very common strategy for a company that starts out broad, and then as they get more refined on what it is that the product's going to be, they get a more clear idea and a more narrow patent application. And then finally, there's the minimalist filing, just because it's all you can afford. Some patent is better than none. But what I often tell my clients is, give me 3 hours. Give me an hour to provide some core claiming strategy, because I can very much tell you it's harder to give me a document and say, you have to create claims out of this fixed template of words, right? You can't go outside of this box. Use these 6,000 words to come up with your claims. Give me an hour, and I'll create the claims from any word in the English language that I need. And then when I come to a year later, presuming this is a provisional filing, I've already got my claims there. And it's much easier to work within that framework. And then give me a couple hours to just cobble together some decent disclosure. I can refer to other issued U.S. patents or published applications. I've probably written 1,000 patent applications in my career. As long as it's in the biotechnology or chemistry area, chances are I've written something that's halfway related. I can cobble together something pretty good. So spend as much money as you possibly can, because up to a certain point, it's all going to be value. It's all going to be gravy. But I'm always willing to understand that there are cost constraints and try to work around that. Now for the claims, the claiming strategies might be what I call the home run claim. This is the claim that gets you the earth, the moon, and the stars. That's great, just keep in mind it's going to be very expensive to prosecute because it's so broad. There's more likely to be prior art issues, there's more likely to be enablement issues, because those things both grow with the breadth of the claim. So it's a great claim, but it's going to be expensive. The picture claim is very narrow. It focuses on your product, and that may be all you need for now. We may take that claim and file a continuation application that Tamara talked about, and we'll go after the home run claim down the road. But at least we've excluded others from competing with our specific product right now. fallback positions are absolutely key. So basically, if you want to ask for the Earth, the Moon, and the stars, go for it. If you don't ask for it, you won't get it. But make sure that you've provided sufficient fallback positions so that you don't go from the broadest claim to something very, very narrow. Don't make that your first fallback position. Make it gradual so that you have intermediate positions, because you never know what the examiner is going to take or not take. And then finally, take what you can get claim, and that's kind of, I already alluded to that with the picture claim. Take what you get means the examiner offers up an intermediate scope claim or even a narrow claim, but it's good enough for now. Take it, issue yourself a patent, it buys you and the company credibility, and then you go after something broader, maybe when you get funding, because now you've got an issued patent that covers at least something. So there's a variety of different strategies. They play out. They work differently in different situations. Some of them are appropriate, and some of them are not, depending on what your particular company is looking for. Now we're going to change tracks a little bit here and talk about. Yes. Can we? If you can hold it, I want to try to make sure we get through everything, and then we'll have some time at the end. So we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about encumbrances. Now, research and reagents cost money, so you may decide that you want to make a deal for one or both. It's easier to get a collaborator to give you something. It's easier to go out and get money from somebody to do the experiment rather than to write an NIH grant. But usually that easier path comes with a cost. There are strings attached. If it's federal funding, even in NIH, there's going to be restrictions on commercialization. You may be required to substantially produce the product in the United States, and your ability to partner outside the U.S. is limited. The government can actually march in and take your invention away. Now, it's very unlikely, but it's at least a lurking possibility. Private funding is probably more problematic in that you're probably going to give up something like maybe an option, maybe a first right of refusal, maybe actually a license on a technology that may come out of it. You may be, basically it's a shotgun wedding. You will have nobody else to talk to on this technology, and therefore, where's your negotiating power? MTAs, material transfer agreements. Some of these I've seen a range from like nothing, basically, here, take it, thanks a lot, don't kill anybody with it, to you've just given up your firstborn to take this material. And what you can end up very quickly doing is double and triple encumbering your technologies. You get 3 MTAs from 3 institutions that all say, if you use my material to make an invention, we own part of it, all right? Reminds me of the producers, right, where they sold 400% of something. And I've had faculty members that have done just that. They've triple sold their technologies. And then finally, co-inventors, right? We talked about how our lab is great at making chemicals, but we're not very good at testing them in a sophisticated cell model or animal model. We're going to collaborate with the University of Mississippi. Well, if you do that, and it turns out that they end up contributing to the conception of whatever invention is made, you've just now given University of Mississippi half-right ownership. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the technology wouldn't get to where it needs to be without them. If that's true, go for it. But if there's a way to work around that, if there's a way to do it within the institution, within the UT system, for example, and not divide ownership, you may have just greatly enhanced the value of the technology. So in the end, I'm not saying don't do these things. You may need them. Without them, the technology doesn't ever move forward. But before you make the decision, weigh the benefit with the cost. Now, particularly if you're going to seek support from non-federal sources, basically third parties that may give you money or reagents. To the extent you can, you're going to want to be able to make sure that your information that goes to them about your project doesn't immediately go out into the public. And the way you do that is by getting third parties to sign non-disclosure agreements. Now, depending on who you're talking to, Pfizer, for example, versus some small company, you may get greater or lesser pushback on that. Some companies just don't, it's not worth it to them to potentially bind up their own research with an agreement with some small company or university. But to the extent that you are going to play this game, you need to play that card and play it early. You need to try to get a non-disclosure agreement, because if you don't, there's nothing to keep that company or institution or funding entity from taking your information and making it public or using it for their own benefit. So it's basically a legal document. It's not a form practice, but it's pretty close. Good NDA, an attorney who's familiar with this practice can provide you with a good NDA that can be very quickly tailored to your purposes. It should identify the scope of the subject matter, state how long the information must be stay confidential, and limit what the third party can do. Those are the basic tenets of it. However, even if you have that, there's a reverse problem. That is, I tell you, oh, my idea is to use X, Y, and Z to treat cancer. And you come back and say, yeah, by the way, you know, I read an article that said if you modify compounds of this class in a certain way, they'll stay in your system longer. I didn't know that. I now need to put that in my application because it's potentially a best mode, maybe, right? I want to claim it because it's actually commercially the most valuable way of practicing invention now. Well, you just contaminated my IP. I'm almost compelled to make you an inventor. So even an NDA doesn't completely insulate your technology from dilution of, or damage. Real quickly, international patenting. We've been talking about filing in the US, a provisional system, so on and so forth. But of course, there's a whole rest of the world. And while maybe 20 years ago I would have said patents in the US are overwhelmingly the most important technology, intellectual property that is, today, I don't think I can say that. There's so much economy and global value in technology that you have to be thinking globally. And it's important then to know just a few of the basic, tenets of international patenting. The Paris Convention. The Paris Convention basically says if you file in your home country, within 1 year, you can file around the world and gain the benefit of your home country filing date. Sort of like the provisional system, right? You measure prior art from today, your provisional date, and not from a year from now when you file in, say, Europe or Taiwan, right? That's the Paris Convention in a nutshell. But what happens is at the end of 1 year, do you really want to file in all the countries that you might want to protect? Well, there are, hundreds of countries that have, intellectual property systems that have patent offices. I can assure you that you don't want to pay that fee at the end of 1 year. You might be talking about $6,000 to $8,000 per country just to file the application. So what you can do is file something called a patent cooperation treaty application, which basically is an omnibus filing that maintains your rights around the world. It will never issue as a patent. It will never give you any actual rights, but it's kind of a big extension on paying the money that you need to go into the national stage applications. You basically buy time by filing a PCT application. But in the end, you'll have to file in the national stage countries if you want to exercise those rights. Just real quickly, a few points about differences between overseas patenting versus the US. Tamara already mentioned this. In the US, we give you a year grace period on your own publications. And in fact, if somebody publishes something 6 months before your filing date, but you actually have a conception and or reduction of practice before that, you can remove that piece of prior art. It's basically called a grace period, as she said, within the United States. Most countries, importantly Europe, do not have such a grace period. You publish today, you file tomorrow, you're dead. Okay? Somebody else publishes today, you file tomorrow, you're dead. The countries that do have a grace period, it's much more limited, both in time and how you can use it. And as I said, probably the second most important jurisdiction behind the United States for intellectual property is Europe, and they don't have a grace period. However, there's no duty of candor, which is very nice because it saves you all this hassle of trying to figure out what you need to tell the patent office about prior art or inoperable species or whatever. But there also are a number of claims that may not be patentable overseas. For example, diagnostics and therapies performed on the human body. They don't want people going around suing doctors and making doctors forego treatment of people. Well, we have patenting of human therapies and diagnostics in the US, and you never hear about doctors getting sued, so it's really kind of an illusory problem, but nonetheless it exists. And then engineered plants and animals in some jurisdictions are not patentable, and also business method patents are not patentable. This gives you a general overview of sort of the timelines. The 1 year period at the beginning, either between a first US provisional or a US non-provisional, followed up by either a US non-provisional and or a PCT application. Then you have this window of 19 to 20 months that goes by during which your PCT application is in existence, at the end of which you have to file your national stage applications, and then they go into prosecution, and then they have their own life course. Things like Europe, Australia moves very quickly. Europe's kind of like in the middle, and Japan generally doesn't get taken up for 5 to 7 years after you file that application. So it's a long time to get a Japanese patent. You can ask for accelerated examination, but a lot of people don't do that just because it incurs costs. But that gives you an idea that we're talking about years. I mean, it might be a decade from the time your first filing is made to the time your last patent would issue on that family. Now, Jackie had told me one important thing we had to talk about was costs. All right, so I'm going to talk first about our U.S. costs. Patentability assessments, $2,000 to $3,000. Could be as low as $1,500, might be higher, depending on how complex, how many inventions we're looking at, how much back and forth with the inventors we need. Sometimes inventors don't give us all the information we need in the first round. That adds costs. And so to the extent that we get a full disclosure, it's going to make our life easier, and it's going to make Jackie's bill cheaper, which she really likes, because she can file on more technologies that way. But that's generally speaking, $1,500 to $2,000 to $3,000, a chunk of which is going to be either search firm fees or database fees that we use internally for doing searches. Application preparation and claims remainder of the application, kind of a broad range there, wouldn't you say? Well, that's because $2,000 is the floor, and $20,000 is probably the most expensive application I personally have ever been associated with. Most of them fall in the 5 to 10 range. Chemical applications tend to be a little more expensive because you spend a lot of time doing claiming strategy, particularly if they're new chemical compounds. Electrical engineering can be expensive depending on, what the technology is. If it's mechanical, it tends to be cheaper. Biotech kind of tends to be right in the middle. But any application can become very expensive for a variety of reasons. Complexity of the technology, inventors not being forthcoming, the prior art being complex, a variety of reasons. Patent office fees range widely. I would say the average U.S. application probably incurs $4,000 to $5,000 overall in PTO fees, some of which are extension fees that we take because we can't respond promptly because we don't get materials and or authorization quickly. So basically, prosecution through issuance, you're looking at $10,000 to $40,000 in the U.S. And then finally, when your patent issues, you still got to pay maintenance fees at 3 points after which your patent issues. Now, contrast to international costs, again, it's multiplied. So U.S. costs, I say 25 to 50, which is probably a fairly comparable range. PCT costs are 8 to 12, but they don't get you a patent. Foreign national costs are going to be 5 to 15K just initially, and that's going to depend on whether you require a translation. And then $10,000 to $50,000 downstream in terms of prosecution, with the $50,000 probably being more like Europe and Japan are probably the only ones that are going to run that kind of costs. So compare $35,000 as an average cost to maybe $175,000 if you went into what we call the 4 big countries, Australia, Canada, Europe, and Japan, when 80% of the profits, and this is a typical pharmaceutical model, so it wouldn't apply across the board, but on a pharmaceutical, when 80% of the profits are in the U.S. So you need to think really hard about where your likely partners are and where your markets are, because it may not make sense for a small company to pony up this kind of money to go into all international jurisdictions that you might normally consider. Okay. So finally, in conclusion, I just wanted to hit a few topics that are things that we find really hurt an inventor or a small company's rights, intellectual property rights, and things that can be avoided very practically. The first, very clearly, is publishing your invention prior to filing. As Tamara said, if it's a week before, it's not going to impact you in the U.S., but it's going to cost you foreign rights, particularly in Europe. If it's more than a year, then it's going to cost you rights in the U.S. as well. Hand in hand with that is failing to understand that that publishing is not just a full journal article. It can be a very casual disclosure, so long as it has sufficient information to teach this person of ordinary skill in the art enough to practice your invention. It can be an abstract, right? It can be a poster at some student presentation. It can be a talk where the only writing is somebody in the audience taking notes or maybe recording it. And so all of those things come in as prior art as well, and they count just as much as a full publication to the extent that they disclose everything. And again, hand in hand with that is forgetting that when you send this abstract into a meeting, it doesn't necessarily only get published at the meeting. It may go online 6 or 8 or 10 weeks before the meeting. And also pre-publications of your articles. The paper copy comes out a certain date, or the journal edition is the 15th, but it goes online as soon as you send your galley proofs back. All of those things come in as prior art. Also, failing to understand that eventually your own patent application is going to be prior art against you. I've had inventors say, well, yeah, we filed that 3 years ago, and now we want to do an improvement. I'll say, well, how is it different from that? Well, it's not that different, just a little bit different. I say, well, your own patent application published 2.5 years ago. It's prior art. What? That's mine. It's not prior. Yeah, it's prior art. 1 year out, doesn't matter what it is. It's prior art against you, whether it's yours or anyone else. And then this whole concept of filing on narrow inventions first, the species, and then waiting and say, well, now I want to file on the generic claim. Well, problem is, if that species, one way or another, hook or by crook, becomes prior art against you, it will defeat the novelty of the later application. Say, but I only had leukemia, and now I want to claim prostate, and I've done every cancer. Well, it doesn't matter. Leukemia is a species of cancer. It will defeat the later filed broader genus. Offering for invention for sale prior to filing. Now, typically in academia, that's not a problem, but not everybody here is from academia. And if you've offered an invention for sale and it's been more than 1 year, and it was ready for patenting at the time you offered it for sale, you've now barred yourself from filing a patent. Failing to accurately and completely document your dates. As I mentioned before, there can be lots of disputes that relate to patents, inventorship, interferences where you decide who was the first to invent, or even in litigation, trying to decide what your invention date is to measure what prior art is available against you. Failing to document when those dates occurred will end up hurting you. Failing to understand the limitations of a minimal provisional filing. We talked about if you put a little bit in a provisional, you're going to get a little bit of credit for it. All that stuff you put in a year later isn't going to tack back to the provisional date. So failing to understand that filing a minimal provisional means you have minimal protection. And then finally, there's a tendency for all of us to go to the cheapest product, the cheapest cost service provider. I do it all the time. I buy something for my house. I want to get the best deal. But particularly in intellectual property, particularly if you're being entrepreneurial and you're going to start a company, going to the lowest cost service provider and being ignorant of that person's experience in this particular technology or in the area of developing technology for small companies and knowing how it has to be packaged will be a mistake. And again, don't just look at an attorney's billing rate. Ask them what the total cost of the project is, and ask people, does that attorney hold up their end of the bargain? Lots of attorneys will say, yeah, it'll cost $6,000, you get the bill, it's 10. Jackie will tell you that too. You've got to trust your counsel to be able to deliver the product for cost. And and it's not necessarily what they bill per hour that's going to tell you what the end product's going to be. So with that, I hope we have a little bit of time for questions. Yes? Okay, really good question. Question is, recording your inventions, can we use electronic means? The question about electronic means is going to be this. Can you establish that they have not been altered from the time they were entered? So if you are able to download your information and lock it, and such that any competent IT person would be able to ascertain from that record that it has not been altered from a given date, I would say you're okay. But I'm a biotech person. I'm not a computer science person. But my understanding is that computer science people tend to be very creative about their ways of manipulating data. And so in litigation, let's say you did just that, and I was your counsel, and we offered up and said, look, this has not been altered. Look at the dates, has not been touched. And they bring in a IT security analyst and says, watch, and he changes the date on a copy that they made to yours, and it shows it up being 1911 was the date it was entered. Well, there's your answer. Right? So, a little old school, I have to say, But until we can guarantee the irrefutable nature of the dating of an electronic document, hard copies are probably going to be better. And also independent human corroboration. So if you can say, I did this, and then you hand it to somebody and said, put this away and don't let me touch it, then that person can come back and say, you know, Dr. Smith gave me this in a sealed envelope on November 22nd, 2008. I haven't touched it. It's been in my safe since. That's pretty damn good corroboration. And in that case, it would be electronic, but you would need the additional human. Basically, what you're talking about is custodial reporting of the document. So, yeah. Yes?
Patenting process can be very long in time, as you've shown, can be very expensive, as you've shown. At the end of that, I know a lot of people, maybe most people, feel that they deserve to make a whole bunch of money. What fraction of patents do you really make a lot of money for the
The question is, what percentage of patents do I think that are filed or issued for actually make money? I will plead the fifth on that. I need to file patent applications to make a living. No, it's a good question. As having primarily prosecuted for the university field for the last 12 years, 14 years, honestly, of the applications I've filed, not issued, but filed, I would say less than 5% make a dime. Of the ones that have issued, I would say it might be 10%. Now, I think it's skewed in the university environment because I think that at least some of them, and I don't just work for universities, but I work for a lot of nonprofit research foundations. Lots of those places do not file patent applications to make money. They file patent applications to protect the rights of their inventors, for gaining, you know, notoriety in the field, that they're not just academics, but that they're, you know, developing practical things, even if they're never ultimately commercialized. I would venture to say that if you looked at all patents that issued, I would probably say still a minority of them ever end up making money. So I think it's a fair question to say, how does an entity, particularly a university, allocate its resources in the patent process? Because it is expensive and it does take a lot of time. And what Corey said to me resonated earlier, and that is try to push technologies outside at a reasonable cost and give them the chance to make money. Because, you know, sort of a chicken or the egg thing. I think that the universities that have big patent budgets are the ones that have had successes. Look at the University of Wisconsin. They were doing university technology transfer before Bayh-Dole even existed. And they have gobs of money, largely from Promega, right? They spent out all of their biotech stuff and they've made a tremendous amount of money. And that's why they've been a leader. But it's very hard to come into an institution that's never really had a technology transfer and say, well, here's $20,000, go see what you can do. Because it just doesn't work that way. You need to have some success to bring in the revenues because then it can build. Because in one sense, you have to invest up front to be able to start making money in the back end. The question is how to do that in a wise fashion. And I think, you know, for Corey, they've got the financial capital to push things through, get them out in the marketplace, even though they know not a lot of them are going to make a ton of money. And so, you know, where there's not a tremendous amount of money, I think one of the things you have to ask is, the hard question is, what is the likelihood that this will ever make a substantial amount of money? And, you know, it takes a lot of great minds to answer that question. And it's not easy. Yes? Oh, yeah. Sorry. So did everybody hear the question? Yes? No? No. So the question was, comment on the following strategy. File a provisional application. Do an analysis of the market. Identify the top 2 or 3 players in the field. Go to these companies with the protection of your provisional filing that established what you had on date X and say, are you interested in this? What's the value of this to you? Will you fund additional research even if you think the technology is not quite ready now? That as a strategy. I think it's an excellent strategy. Know, however, that one, the company is going to look at your provisional filing, and if it is a minimalist provisional filing, they'll discount it and say you might as well not have spent your money on it. 2, just as important as the IP, it's going to be the faculty member, right? The faculty member or the PI of the small company and their credibility to follow through. Because one provisional application, either for a company or university, it's nothing. In fact, most of the time, the first filing ends up going in the trash can. It's the 4th or 5th or 8th or 12th filing that really hits on the product. So it's going to be at least half the credibility of the company and the investigator to follow up. But other than that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that strategy. It's actually a very good one and not uncommon.
The NDA, do you have a patent that's in process? You have an issue with patent. Still required to have non-disclosure.
Well, your patent application will not publish for 18 months from your earliest claim priority date. So let's say you're provisional, right? And so if you file a provisional and then you go to someone without an NDA, then they have no obligation, legal obligation, to keep that information quiet. That may not matter to you. Once your provisional's in, or maybe you're even less, maybe you're 11 or 13 months out, and your provisional and your non-provisional will publish in 5 months. You don't care. But if it's a month after your provisional, and this company is known for going and playing with your competitors, as well as you might want an NDA, so they're not sharing that information. So there's no stock answer, I guess. But a provisional doesn't necessarily obviate the need for an NDA. Yes?
Once you file for the nomination,
The question is, once you file your provisional, when can you publish? Well, that depends. If in a perfect world, I'd say after the non-provisional application publishes. Here's the problem. Let's go back to our scenario. You file on treating leukemia, and then a week later you publish on treating leukemia. And then 8 months later, 10 months later, you decide that you want to file your non-provisional and you have 6 more cancers. But at the time you published your leukemia, you really thought it was only going to be blood-borne cancers. The compound you were using, you had reason to believe it wasn't going to be good against solid tumors. You later then find out that's not true, and you file your non-provisional for all cancers. And the examiner says, wow, leukemia in the provisional, you're now claiming solid tumors. Do you get benefit of priority back to your provisional date? Answer, no. There's nothing about solid tumors in your provisional. Prior art comes in, right? It's your own prior art, published a week after your provisional was filed. So yeah, but that's only 11 months before my non-provisional date, so it's not a 102B novelty defeating bar. True, it's not. It's 102A art. Problem is, you have to show possession of the invention being claimed prior to that publication. But we just said that in 10 months, it took 10 months to figure out you could treat solid tumors. Your publication on leukemias has killed your claim to all cancers. So the answer is, it depends. If your invention is done, complete, will never be changed, yeah, then it's not going to matter. But if there's going to be follow-on stuff, and that's particularly the scenario contemplated by the provisional system, then your publications during your provisional year can very well negatively impact your own prior, your later filing. May not, but it could. Yes.
Have you or other legal firms been known for a 7% equity in lieu of a fee?
There was a law firm in California in the late 90s that was the darling of the IP world. Venture capital loved them. The firm was called Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison. They went from a small, middle-sized firm to a huge firm. You walk in their lobby and they had holographs walking on the floor. They had, this is back in the days when flat panels were a big deal, $20,000 for, this one. They went out of business in 2003. All their partners were sued for bankruptcy. That was sort of their bailiwick, was taking equity in companies. Now, that said, law firms still do occasionally take equity, but that was proved to be a very risky endeavor. Most law firms like cold hard cash. Our law firm loves cold hard cash. We don't borrow money. We buy everything we have. We don't have a loan for anything. So we don't do that. But there are some smaller law firms that still do it, but it's nowhere near as prevalent as it was in the early 2000s. That was considered the way to be an instant millionaire if you were a law firm, is take equity and then they go public and you've got a chunk of Google, right? Yeah, that doesn't happen that much anymore.
Fortunately, we have to stop now because we have a session starting,
Yep.
but thank you so much. We appreciate it. Actually, they have to catch a flight, too. So I wanted to introduce Dr. John Lloyd. I've talked a lot today, sorry. And anyway, Jack was the professor that Dr. Cardenas referred to this morning about an internationally respected research professor, and he's going to be working on moderating the next sessions. And so I'd like to introduce Dr. Lloyd because he's going to introduce our next speaker.
You'll notice that people call me John and people call me Jack. My official name is John, but when I was small, my mother told me Jack was short for John. And my mother was somebody you never argued with. And so I accepted that, and I have lived by that word ever since. So as people get to know me, they call me Jack. If they just see my name plastered somewhere, it's John, but please call me Jack. The next session that we're going to have starts to get down to answering some of the questions we had this morning. Deals with money. Maybe one of the most important things, besides having a great idea, is having the money to do something with it. Whether it be for patents or for venturing and getting it out into the market, that is what becomes important. And we've got two people who are very and highly qualified to talk about these issues. The first one will be Ramiro Garza, who is the executive director of the Edinburgh Economic Development Corporation, and he was also kind enough to provide us with our continental breakfast this morning, which we thank you for. That was great. Saved my life because there was that nice hot coffee when I got here. So. But Ramiro Garza has, as executive director, has had many successes in terms of bringing companies into the valley. Most recently, I think the big splash came when he was able to bring in a $180 million denim manufacturing plant and bring in lots of jobs, which is always good. And so, I don't know, are you going to talk sequentially? Okay, so without any other words, Ramiro Garza, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know, Kathy, if we're supposed to, you can stay right there, that's fine. I'll just refer to you here. I think this will work here, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, John, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here with you all. When Jackie called me, I think she just stepped out to do this, I couldn't help to think about, she says, you're going to have to talk about funding opportunities for technology startups. Couldn't help to think about 10 years ago, I don't know if y'all remember, it was this commercial on TV of this gentleman in a suit. He had some glasses. He was on the steps of the Capitol waving this thick book like this, right? It says, free money. I see some nods in the room. I couldn't help to think about that because, you know, I think 10 years ago I used to be employed with the One Stop Capital Shop, which is now all part of the network of the Small Business Development Centers, which we have some representatives here. And I would be visited often with that very book, you know, by different folks. And, you know, I remember having to go through it. And anyway, I just thought I'd bring that out. I just thought that was interesting because it's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about. And by the way, there's no cold hard cash. And in any of the slides you'll see here, I understand you know, there is some funding opportunities, but as our previous speaker mentioned, I think a very good point is that, you know, just be careful on which of those opportunities you do take advantage of, because, you know, there are some requirements, there are some, and I'm going to get into some of those on some of the opportunities that are out there that might prevent you from fully implementing, you know, a business plan of yours in your business. So, so with that, I'll just start the presentation. This is just a quick outline of some of the items that I'll be covering. I know some of the items on the state, Kathy will be talking about, I think, the Emerging Technology Fund, and so even though I have it on there, I won't get into it. I'll just refer to it, but I have a lot of just different points of references for you here in a way to help you navigate through some opportunities that are out there, both from you know, government related, federal, state, and then local, and then also just some other types of funding that perhaps you might have thought of, and others that you might have not. So so this is just kind of an idea of what will be covered. Before I start, and I wasn't here this morning, I should have, I did want to just start by just kind of going over, I guess, an overview of startups. You know, University of Minnesota's Office of Technology Commercialization has these very good 10 must-answer questions for startups. And I think, you know, many of you, I'm sure, have looked at, you know, the different components there are in a business plan. In fact, we have, and I keep on plugging them, but at Small Business Development Center, we have some representatives here of, you know, they work and help businesses with their business plans and obtain funding. But, you know, I thought this was interesting that, at least for technology, this Office of Technology Commercialization, it has different folks that go through the program, go through these series of questions, and with an emphasis to try to find out, are you ready? And not only are you ready, but are you ready to raise capital as a second step? And then if you're ready to start your business and raise capital, you know, are you ready to go to the next level and hire employees and those things? And I just thought I'd put them up here. It's, you know, what is a problem? You know, what is a solution? What are solutions' features and benefits? The benefits and how can it be reflected in your pricing? And what barriers are there to this approach? What is the initial market? And you know, the competitors. A lot of these things are components of a business plan, which I'll going to lay out in the next slides. But also, what are your milestones and costs to make this solution work? And each of them individually. And then finally, what are the comparable companies valued at in the market if you're able to attain that? I think those are some of the critical, I guess, questions that need to be asked when an idea is thought of, or perhaps, you know, you have a business that you're trying to grow. I think these are some of the key things to look at. And I mentioned that from the standpoint of raising capital and obtaining funding. I think these are critical things that will be needed to attain. Now, next, I'm going to just breeze through it real quickly, just as an overview. I'm not sure if it was covered, but I know there's some material here that could help you with, but it's just the business plan components, which is out of the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Development Centers. These are I guess a couple points on this. These are, I guess this is a comprehensive outlook of the business plan. Of course, you have your title page, executive summary, description. A lot of you that are here know this, but don't leave any of these steps out. I think it's important to go through this, and I call it comprehensive plan because, when you look for different opportunities, you might need to just present some key things for financial projections, description of your company, market analysis. But, if you do that, don't, still go through this comprehensive process of laying out by these categories, because it's only going to help you in anything that you do, whether it's attaining funding, through government or through other sources. These are just some of the other categories on the business plan. Now, sources of funding. These are some of the areas that I'm going to focus on. I went back and forth to include a category grants, but I was asked to discuss about that. So I am going to cover a couple things about that. And in the interest of full disclosure, again, let you know that it's very difficult to attain grants without it affecting your business plan in the future. I'll just say that, and I'll explain a little bit more as I get into any of these programs. But I'm going to touch on different things associated with these items on sources of funding. Federal government. I was told by Jackie this hasn't been covered, so I'll just touch on it. The Small Business Innovation Research Program and the State Technology Transfer Research Program. These are as close as you will find to types of grants that federal government awards, and they do that through the different programs that are created with different agencies. They mandate different agencies to award to small businesses grants that are engaged in R&D, research and development projects with commercial potential. Going back to my point about the different funds that you could attain, this is not like the patent process, but this is there's a lot involved in this. There's a lot of commitment by a business, by a person that would chooses to go through this route in attaining some funds, whether it's to study the potential of meeting the objectives of a federal agency, or whether it's to partner with another entity that could collaborate and together provide these research and perhaps even some continuation awards. But these, there are some requirements. The company must be incorporated and located obviously here in the U.S., but and it has to be 51% owned by individuals. What that means is here in the U.S., but also more importantly is that it needs to be a business that's already been established. And I think once you look in, and I have some links in here. I think these present slides are going to be made available. There's a link here in the top where you could go to it, and it'll give you a little bit more information on some of these. But as far as grants from the federal government, I talked about that thick book. I mean, this is probably, and I should have done that, I'm sorry. I work with the Economic Development Corporation. We're an office created by the city to work with new businesses coming to the city and work with existing ones. We do have, what I'm presenting to you, we do have as an outline when we meet with clients, because we do have clients that do come in and expect to have, grants or other sources of funding. So this is information that we also do have available, and I'll have my contact information towards the end. And like I mentioned, the technology transfer program, research program, is really a collaboration between a business and a research institution that could apply for these awards. And it's actually criteria similar to the Small Business Innovation Research Program. So as far as federal funding, this is probably, there are other funding resource programs, but they are loans. They're not grants that perhaps you could apply for. These are from the federal government, those that are available. Now going to the state side, I'm not going to get into this much because I know it's going to be the focus of the next presenter of Kathy here with Emerging Technology Fund, but this is a slide just kind of gives you an idea of the state has created a fund for it's for emerging technology, and these are some of the categories that are involved with that fund for funding. And this, in the bottom is a local contact. These are divided upon regions, and I just wanted to put up this for your information. Our local contact, I would say, there's I don't know how many regions. Is it 7 regions? And the region here in the valley is, I think, from Laredo all the way to Brownsville. But if you have an idea, if you have a project that you would like to apply for these funds, you can't apply directly to the state. You have to go through your regional entity. And this is the local contact, the Rio Grande Regional Commercialization and Innovation Center. Yeah, I was looking for him, but I don't think he's here. And I'm sure Kathy's going to get into a little bit more on the Emerging Technology Fund. The next one is the Texas Enterprise Fund. This is not just for technology, but this is another fund that's available from the state for companies. And we've applied. I know Jackie mentioned the Santana Textiles, the denim manufacturing plant. That company did get awarded funds from this Texas Enterprise Fund. It is, I would say, an evolving fund. It was created over 4 years ago with the intention of bringing new business to the state. Initially, when it was created, it wasn't meant towards have existing businesses, but it has been widened. And I'll tell you, we've been through that process. If there's any project or business that chooses to apply for this, you have to work with a local community, such as, in our case, our corporation, to apply directly for this fund. People say that it's not attainable. It is. We went through that process. In fact, we have a pending one also right now for another project. And really, the key to this program is job creation and having the pay of those jobs at least average or higher pay than the county average weekly wage. So this is another program, and the link you see in the bottom, TexasOne.us, I'm going to actually go to it real quick just to help you navigate. I think this link together. I just wanted to show you when you go to this link where to go exactly for, just real quickly. This is the State of Texas site on all the financial resources. So a lot of the slides you have here, you can go to this page. Well, it might not work like I want to, but if you go just to financial resources here, you'll see a lot of the information that we're discussing here, and probably even more detail. So just wanted to show you that real quick. These are just for more information on those programs that I talked about, and I'm sorry, those are in I think those links were clicked on, so it's in red, but if you can't read them. But these are the Texas industry clusters. I'll just tell you real quickly that those funds that I just mentioned, as far as the state is concerned, these have been adopted as the actual clusters that the state is focusing on. So if any company has ties to any of these clusters, you'll be given more consideration because of that. But in general, any kind of technology, emerging technology, will be accepted. But these are somewhat a priority. But not to say that no other industry isn't. But these are our adopted clusters for the state. Just moving on here, angel and seed funding. Just to cover back on what we had talked about, a couple of points on this. friends and family, I know that, it's always a way to raise money. One thing I will tell you though is that if you do plan to have loans or money raised from friends or family, make sure they're accredited, because if you do plan to go out and take your idea for an IPO in the future, there are some strict rules by the SEC that you have to have any type of investment into your business or idea has to be accredited. Accredited means that they have to have a net worth of at least $1 million and income of at least $200,000 annually. Not a lot of people know that, but I think that's why I wanted to make a reference here on the friends and family or any other type of funding that you seek, aside from reducing your ownership in the company. You will need to make sure you're aware of that, because it will be affected in the future. If you never go out for an IPO, that's fine, but I think at one point it would affect you. Now, we've talked outside here, we're talking about angel networks. There's not one that exists currently here in the region. I know the judge was here earlier this morning talking about our Rio South Texas Economic Council. It's a regional group that's come together to promote the region as a whole. I think it is one item of interest to all of us. Entrepreneurship is key to all of us. In fact, I always tell people, they always ask me, there's a lot of jobs being created that seems to be the driver for the region. And I always tell them, well, it's the entrepreneurship of this area. There's a lot of new businesses that are created, more so here probably than any other area, because of the different opportunities that exist here and the level of growth. I don't want to speak for the SBDC, but they're probably one of the more active centers and throughout the state, and that at least is indicative of what's taking place. And I just mentioned the Emerging Technology Fund, but if you do get these slides, go to the Centex Angel site, because this is one that a lot of folks are, I think, I see Kathy waving that. This is probably there's one in East Texas, I think, one in North Texas, but the one in Central Texas is very unique, and I urge you to kind of look into that. I'm not saying that's something that's going to be had here in the Valley as a whole, but we will have, I think, a network eventually, but we don't have one right now, and something we're going to strive for. Okay, venture capital. A few points on venture capital. In general, these are some of the 3 key factors that I looked at: management experience, market size, and obviously sustainability. Your business plan, if you do seek venture capital, needs to revolve around these 3 items. In addition to the comprehensive nature of it that I mentioned earlier, I think this is key. This is very key, because if you look at a list of different ones that are available out there, in particular, if you go to this National Venture Capital Association website, actually includes quite a bit of information on the type of venture capital firms out there, and what you would need to do to prepare your business or yourself to attain venture capital monies, which is, I would say, very difficult. And I will probably plead the fifth. Somebody asked me what's the percentage of, like that gentleman mentioned on how many of them get funded. It's very, very difficult, but it is an option to look into as well. Of course, there's always debt and asset financing. I know for startups it's very difficult, but I think it is something to still keep in mind. We can't forget that even though you have an idea, it's a startup, you do have options, to acquire debt. I mean, it's not free money, but it is nonetheless an opportunity for you to attain funds. You'll know that if you do go through this process, I mean, there is going to be quite a bit of investment from yourself, more so than you even had anticipated in trying to obtain funds. But this is just very general items. This is not probably the best time in the world to go perhaps to seek this type of financing, but it nonetheless is available. I've talked to a few banks locally recently because of some projects we're working on, and they are lending money, folks. I know it's talked about quite a bit in the media and everything about how there's not money out there. Well, if you have an idea, if you have a project, if it's collateralized, if you do have some of your investment into the project, I think banks are willing to look at it. I mentioned Small Business Administration only because it is, that is from the federal government, but it is a guarantee that the government could make on a loan. Not so sure if they do startups though, but again, as you grow your company, it's something that that could be available to you. And there are microloan programs. I didn't list them through here. In fact, I was going to put a link on here on the different programs that are available. I'll have our contact information towards the end. We can forward you a list of microloan programs that are available for funds from $5,000 to about $50,000 in size. And many of you may be surprised to know that foundations are a good source of funds also, in particular for technology. If you go to foundationcenter.org, if you search some of the site there that has to do with, and just as an example, healthcare, it'll give you a pretty good list of foundations that are looking for solutions and are looking for ways to improve on their service delivery. I think that it's very specific though. You need to make sure that your idea or product, your business that that you are going to try to, the service you're going to try to present is in line with some of those industry, because I think some of those dollars that are awarded sometimes multi-year. So if you can't provide, you need to look at it very clearly, but it is, I think, an option worth looking into in the spirit of looking for additional monies. And foundations are, foundationcenter.org is probably the most comprehensive site you'll find in foundations information. So as far as grants, that's monies, actual monies, I want to say cold hard cash, but funds that you could seek directly. Those are some of the funds. Now, I'll get into some other financial resources that are out there in the state of Texas through corporations such as ours, the Economic Development Corporation, which, by the way, are formed in a number of cities in the state, have different other programs available to us that could be made available to companies. An enterprise zone program is a designation that your project could receive from each city, each corporation such as mine can evaluate your project and determine to see if it qualifies. The benefit to that is that it reimburses companies that are doing real estate improvements. So if you're paying sales tax for perhaps computers or other things and you're creating jobs, you are going to receive a benefit or at least a reimbursement of those sales taxes that you're paying to the state. As y'all know, when you go buy product, it's 8.25% in most cities. 6.25% of that goes to the state, and so that's what will be reimbursed to you. Also, economic development corporations have ability to make loans directly to companies, and that is done primarily through the Texas Leverage Fund, which is a economic development bank. This is just a fund available to economic development corporations, not available directly to companies, but to corporations to apply and then in turn lend out to businesses that are looking for loans. And again, that Texas One site can give you some more information. Now, these two funds, next one's the Product Development Fund and the Small Business Fund, are two funds that are available directly to the business. These are actually fairly new funds. They were issued by the state of Texas. There were some bonds that were issued through, I think in 2005. Really, I don't know if y'all remember Sematech. They expanded in Austin, Texas. Primarily, these bonds were issued to provide for that project, but now those funds have been repaid, and these monies are available. There's the Product Development Fund finances everything from development, production, and commercialization of new or improved products within the state. They can award up to $10 million for any project on the Product Development Fund, as well as a Small Business Fund. They work very alike. And again, that site or through our office, we can give you more information on these programs. Finally, local resources. I keep on mentioning Economic Development Corporation. We're sales tax corporations. Every cities levy a half-cent sales tax for promoting economic development and attracting new business and jobs to each community. There's an array of ways that these corporations can work with you. I would urge you to just contact our office to find out, how we can work with your business to assist. Some corporations own real estate, others give direct loans. And so there's a myriad of ways. So there's Chapter 380 programs is just the chapter of the local government code of our state statute that has to do with cities that don't have economic development corporations that can provide loans directly to businesses. And so this is available. It's not very popular, but it is something that's available. Of course, there are some tax abatements for those projects that qualify, where your taxes can be abated. And again, these will range depending on the cities. And there are infrastructure and job training programs available as well. And with that, I think, let our next speaker come to the floor. I'll be here for any additional questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
I think we'll take questions at the end of the next presentation. Does that sound fine?
Yes,
okay,
sir.
Great. Our next presenter is Kathy Swain. We're very pleased to have her here. She's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Commercial Development of the University of Texas System, the Office of Research and Technology Transfer. And because of tightness of time, I'm going to let Kathy get started as soon as she's ready there. Thank you. We're very pleased to have you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here. And thank you, Romero. I see what, oh, there you are. Jackie means about the light. It occurred to me earlier today, and I don't have a slide for this actually, but that some of you might wonder, what is the UT system? We don't have any alumni and we don't have a football team. So, it's hard to talk without a football team in Texas, for sure. But I thought I'd just give you a little background. We are sort of the administrative oversight for the 15 UT institutions, including UT Pan Am, UT Brownsville, UT Austin, people know, obviously, MD Anderson. We have 9 academic institutions, 6 health institutions around the state. We're not a central governing body in the really strict sense. We're different than a lot of university systems like A&M in California, in that we're more of a resource, more of a service organization. So I like to say that, I'm the little "may I help you" girls I used to say to my mother when we were shopping in the grocery store. What I do is advocate, try to identify gaps, resources that are needed, then find them, try to put people together, and try hard to understand what people are doing, and where there might be synergy and collaborative opportunities and that sort of thing. I'm in the Office of Research and Technology Transfer, which you see mentioned up here. There are 7 of us. We do commercialization, coordinate commercialization opportunities around the state, as well as technology transfer. We try to get the professionals together who are doing the work on the campuses. We provide a variety of services. So that's a little bit about us. About me, I'm relatively new to the academic world, which is, I think, why they stuck me in this role. I've done a little bit of everything in the financial services industry, from investment banking at 37 Wall Street as a Morgan investment banker, to running a property management company on Main Street in a very rural part of Vermont, and a lot of different things in between. So my background is ventures and money, and my master's is in finance. I guess you'd say, being in an academic environment, you have to qualify yourself that way. I'm actually ABD PhD in pure finance with a real estate major, believe it or not. I was a portfolio manager for a long, long time. So those are kind of the commercial skills that I bring to this effort, and having done a sort of a broad range of things, I try to apply those skills basically to understanding what other people are telling me that they're doing and how those things might fit together. Just real quickly, I wasn't exactly sure how much time we were going to have and what to focus on here for you today, but I just want to say, the new buzz terminology at the state for economic development is eco-devo. So I'm dubbed the Eco Devo Diva, and my take on what is Eco Devo, what is economic development, is that it's all about you. You have an opportunity to make a difference in your region, in your town, in the world, with the work that you're doing. And yes, you can make money, hopefully, and importantly, you can have fun. But the most important thing about the opportunity that you're here to learn about today is that you can really make a difference in the world. And there are a few quotes that I'm going to skip, but the essence of which, there's a Kaufman report that Jackie shared with me that has just come out this past week, I guess. It's called the 2008 State New Economy Index, Benchmarking Economic Transformation in the States. And the overall point they make is that today's economy is knowledge dependent, it's global, which is sort of like duh, right? It's rooted in information technologies, and it's driven by innovation. And I think that it's notable in this report that Texas is ranked #1 in export focus of manufacturing and services. It's leading the state that has the high value added, technologically advanced manufacturing sectors. Texas' top rank is owed to trade with Mexico, which accounts for 1/3 of the state's exports, as well as robust oil and petroleum industry exports. But even after holding constant oil and petroleum industry sectors' propensity to export, Texas manufacturers export more than 3 times the national average. This is important to you, in my humble opinion. Also in globalization, Texas as a state ranks 2nd in the nation in terms of the extent to which the state's manufacturing and service workforce is employed producing goods and services for export, and the share of the workforce employed by foreign-owned companies. Texas is 2nd. So on those 2 factors, we have tremendous potential, and that potential is represented right here in the Rio Grande Valley. I think you have a tremendous story to tell and many opportunities that are certainly worthy of money, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about here today, right? You want me to talk about money, don't you? Well, I'm not clicking here? Sure. Go for it. Great, thank you. That's where I want to be. Okay, you've heard some really great presentations today, including the one that just preceded me about possible money sources. And so I'm going to be a little redundant and just point out that commercial success is a team sport. An idea is just an idea. It's great, and we should be passionate about our ideas, but you're going to need money, and you're going to need business skills. And business skills constitute a whole host of things. Each one in and of itself is a discipline, a separate discipline. Marketing, sales, manufacturing, distribution, accounting, finance, legal, personnel management. Each one of those is a discipline in itself. You need all of those things. So I have a 3-legged stool up here just to illustrate, if you have a great idea and you have money, is that stool going to stand up on 2 legs? Not without the business skills. You need the whole team in order to make it work. We've had references today to football. I was told when I first moved here that I really only needed 4 words to get into any conversation. Of course, I moved to Austin, so you'll understand this. I have to do this after all the mentions of the A&M season that's been so bad. And those 4 words are, how about them horns? And I found that works. I mean, it actually it's a starter for any conversation. But then I really can't say that either without referencing with some, humility, Texas Tech's performance out there this season. It's been pretty good too. Now, I actually come from, my background was originally Illinois, then I worked in Silicon Valley for a while, then the Upper East Coast, right? Manhattan and also the Boston area. So my son is a hockey player. That sport came up this morning too, as I remember. In fact, he started, anybody remember the movie The Mighty Ducks? Do you guys see those? Okay, you remember the pads, the leather pads? And my son started out in Mighty Duck pads as a goalie at age 7. So I am truly a hockey mom. And the reference to keeping your eye on the puck, no, it's just like skiing. You ski 10 yards in front of you. You look at where the puck is going. And if you're a goalie, How do you get juke? You commit early. You get that goalie to commit early. You don't want to commit early, right? So that brings me to the next point, which is not to go backwards. Did I do that? Oh. Which is timing. Timing can be everything. Think just, for example, about the pet example this morning, and the thousands of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars people are spending now on their pets. That certainly 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been true. What if you tried to sell those services 10 years ago? How would you have done? Timing can be everything. In fact, first to market, timing to market can in some cases be more important, more valuable in dollar terms than your patent protection, actually. And patent protection is only as good as people not violating it. So more to think about there. You all have a rapid response manufacturing center here at Pan Am, and that is a tremendous asset for the Valley. You can make it faster, better, quicker, more customized. That is something that you really need to take advantage of as a community. I want to also mention the Southwest Airlines example that came up earlier in another context, because I think it's relevant. When you start thinking about your business opportunity, you think about time to market, speed, faster, better, quicker, more customized. The CEO of Southwest Airlines decided that he wanted to accelerate the speed at which they could get the planes out of the gates. And so instead of just looking inside the box at the model that they were using, he said, who does that really well? What's a good metaphor or model for our industry? And he went to NASCAR races and watched the pit crew make the changes and discovered how the teams were constituted. Each one was a specialist, but everybody on the team knew how to do what everyone else knew how to do. And that is how Southwest Airlines gets their planes in and out of the gate so quickly. You want to think about an analog for what it is you're trying to do. Who does it really well that isn't necessarily the obvious thing? And that's where timing comes in. Is the business plan important? Should I go there? Yes, and some of the things that it really is. Yes, I'll reinforce to your students the notion that it is critically important. You got to have it. You also need courage, and you are risk managers if you're entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneurial lifestyle, go ahead, is really a roller coaster. Anyone that's ever done it knows that. I think of teaching entrepreneurship as sort of like trying to teach someone how to play the piano. You can teach them how to move their fingers across the keys, how to read music, all the mechanics, but there's a passion, there's a spark, there's a talent that comes with entrepreneurship. So we need to learn what to do, and then you have to develop that skill and that talent. If I'm going to do this, and I've got the passion, I've got the timing, got the idea, I've got the business skills, or I have a team together with it, how am I going to pay for this? You did a great job, Ramiro, of really coming up with those options. I would add credit cards to the list because a lot of people do that. As you can see, I'm not recommending it. Friends and family is a very common approach, and the warnings that you've heard are appropriate. I would add to that friends and family list potential customers. Sometimes your customers will help you finance your business, your startup. Angels, I put a question mark for the reason you've heard, which is that statewide, angel networks are really well established here in Texas and around the country. As I understand, there is not one in the Valley. And it is something I think that you could really benefit from, and there are good models like the one that you referred to. And what are angels? They're high net worth individuals. They're serial entrepreneurs, not killers. They really are not meant to kill the deals. They're meant to contribute. Venture capitalists, I would say, are at the stage at which we're talking here, probably not money that you're going to be able to attract, certainly for startup. They've gotten so big that they do very little early stage startups. And besides that, they don't want to go to work. Venture capitalists don't want to go to work. You don't go to them expecting them to, quote, help you with start your business. They want their money to go to work. So that means they want to see that you have a management team in place that covers all those disciplines I mentioned earlier. And you won't have in the very beginning. You're going to be assembling that team. And the money that you raise initially will be money to pay for that. You can go to the next one. Ramiro mentioned the government sources much more thoroughly than this. I am going to focus on the ETF, and thank you for introducing it. And thank you for also mentioning the 3 types of awards, the research superiority, the research matching. I'm going to focus on, you can go ahead, the commercialization awards. This slide has a lot of words on it, and if you want to pick them up, you can. The bottom line is that the TTF is looking to fund companies. Early stage, they've got moved further back in terms of what they will fund. Technology-based private businesses. You must have a collaboration with a university, a state, private or public university, like UTPM and Pan Am down here. I can explain in a little more detail what that means if you want to know that answer. You must guarantee that the employment, basically, the manufacturing or the commercialization of the employment will be created in Texas. The goals are obvious. They're eco-devo goals for a vibrant economy, global leadership in competitiveness, and so on. Economic benefit, we're looking to create high-quality jobs here, is the purpose of the ETF money. Priority to companies that involve emerging technology, hence the term, and get it, or technology fields that may result in a medical or scientific breakthrough. Previous equity investment into the company from one of the other sources that we listed a few minutes ago. Certainly SBIR, STTR money is very attractive in making an application to the TETF. Authorized expenses are listed here. We can go past that. The next slide has a summary of the awards that have been granted to date, and I've also referenced here the ones that have benefited University of Texas system institutions and companies that are affiliated with UT system institutions. And you can see the totals for yourself. I've highlighted the commercialization awards. The ETF has invested a total of $162 million in Texas. That's a lot of money in ventures. Not all of that in startups, but still about 60 million of that in startups, of which about 3/4 has gone to over 40 companies that have relationships, collaborations with UT institutions. So that 40 million didn't go to the universities, it went to companies that are started up out of the universities. In addition, the ETF has provided us an incentive of 5% of, quote, research superiority awards to help build capacity to expand commercialization opportunities in Texas. And that's resulted in a total of $1.75 million coming to UT system universities for building their tech transfer and commercialization activities. How do I apply to the TETF? You mentioned this already. You need this contact. I would also mention this is your regional RCIC contact. I would also mention there is an 8th region. There's a statewide life sciences RCIC that is not regional, so it's not an R, it's a CIC, statewide Center for Innovation and Commercialization. And Andrew Nat is the contact for that. I did not think to put that on this slide. If you're interested, I can give you that contact information. And then at UT System, we can also help. We have sponsored a Texas Ignition Fund. We started it, actually it was approved in December of last year for $2 million. We started funding it this year. And it is specifically for faculty, staff, students of institutions around UT System, including UT Pan Am. And it's at that point where this fund is intended to help bridge what they call the valley of death. The point at which your research money ends, the idea is going to die because there's not funding to prove that it has commercial potential. So you can't get really to angels. The term for it is, and it's pretty widely recognized as valley of death, between discovery and a marketable product. The TIF, as we affectionately call it, is meant to stimulate commercialization at all 15 universities. Go ahead. As I mentioned, it's a $2 million fund. We grant up to $50,000 in individual awards. The program is intended to what we call proof of concept, which is a bit of a term of art. But and we still are working, sort of inventing ourselves, getting exactly what we call what is the sweet spot for what is a TIF eligible award. But it's really funding situations where you're reducing an idea to practice. You're saying, this is a great idea, it's a great technology, here's how we're going to apply it, here's how we're going to commercialize it. Prototype development is certainly an eligible use of TIF grants. Go ahead. The goals are pretty lofty, and this is a lot of words on the page. It's really to support commercialization, to stimulate it, ignite it, get it going in the 15 institutions. So far, we've had 61 proposals from 12 of our 15 institutions. We've had 2 from UT Pan Am. We've funded 1 of those. We've funded 28 in total for $1.2 million. We've got about 800,000 left, and we're going to have our next deadlines early in 2009 to be announced. We're kind of reviewing the program now to see how we're doing and if we need to make any changes. As I said, it's a proof of concept fund. It is not basic research. We're giving a preference to inventions that have startup potential, but certainly inventions that are good licensing opportunities will be also considered. We're requiring an authorized university official signature, which I think is Jackie in this case, or is it Wendy? Both of you, okay. But this is who you go to. Eligible costs, the costs must be eligible. I'm going to show you what those are. Milestones must be measurable, and we're requiring that you have a regional business or entrepreneurial mentor connection in support of your application for the TIF grant. Eligible costs will fund up to $50,000 in direct costs for these items listed. You can ask me questions later because I see I'm running out of time. The next slide shows you, this is a table that's actually in the application, and I have found that this is one thing I will change, I think, on the next round, because what I've found is that people are very confused between what's a milestone and what's a use of funds. Is a business plan a milestone or a use of funds? I call it a milestone. How am I going to pay for that? I'm going to pay a consultant. That's a use of funds. So that's just in the category of TIF tips. The milestones have to be eligible, and I know that Jackie is very able to give you a lot of very specific coaching on that, and I'm always available and willing to do that as well. More TIF tips coming here. It has to be an innovation. It can't be basic research. Milestones can't be years. That's a tip that it's not innovation and that it is basic research. We require an elevator pitch, a synopsis of the deal, and it can't be 50 stories. We're really, what I like to tell people is think of it as, you're having a barbecue in your backyard. Your neighbor, who's a very bright person, maybe a lawyer, maybe an English teacher, says, so what are you working on? How do you answer that question without ending the conversation immediately? These can't be 8-syllable words, strung together in paragraphs this long. Okay, it's an elevator pitch means, exactly that. 5 flights, maximum. The proposal should have a customer market focus, commercial focus. Who's going to use it? Why? What need does it fill? How much will they pay for it? Some of the items that you covered before. We found that the TIF deals fall into 3 categories. If they're not exactly right for the TIF, it's either because they're more basic research, they're not close enough to commercialization, the 50,000 isn't going to put it over the top for commercialization. It's a lifestyle company, or what we call a boutique, which means it's a good opportunity, it's going to make someone a good living, but it doesn't have enough market potential to be worthy of a TIF grant, but it's something you might fund with angels or friends. Or it's beyond the TIF, it's ready for ETF, in which case we want to help you. We want to help you get that ETF application through. More tips. The title should be a soundbite. It should not be too technical. I could give you examples, but we don't have time. The synopsis, once again, should be barbecue, cocktail party language. You'd like people to continue to talk to you, right? This is true no matter who you're asking for money, and we ask for that, especially when through TIF proposals. Angels, no matter who you're dealing with, you need to learn how to do that. The funds have to be eligible. And please, 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 in a TIF proposal, don't say it's a $10 billion market and then just keep talking. You need to support exactly what you mean by that. And also don't tell us that there's no competition. Because that either means your timing is completely off, or it means you're substituting for something, or you haven't done your homework. So those two things would be big red flags. The process, it's a non-confidential application. You can only go 7 pages. The form is very explicit. You go to your tech transfer office. They will then submit it. They'll screen it and help you with it, actually. Jackie's very good at that. And then they will submit it to our office with the appropriate signatures and with the business community support letter that I mentioned. We will review it. We have external reviewers. We have an Ignition Fund advisory board that makes final decisions. Then we communicate, negotiate a contract, and review it in 6 months. These are some of the metrics that we look at, that we're going to look at in the program, and it's so new that we actually haven't made any of those assessments yet. So to be continued at your next boot camp, we'll let you know how we're doing. And in fact, it is a team sport, so your great idea needs money, it needs business skills, it needs great timing, and you guys have a chance to make especially that last point possible here. So we ready to make a difference? Back to football. Who's next?
We would like to take a few minutes for questions. There's a question up here.
Kathy, I know the ETF program has been around for several years now. Can we really brag about some great companies from that?
So the question was, the ETF's been around for really 2 years, a couple years. So in fairness, it's amazing. I'm amazed to say, yeah, in fact, we can. I mean, Cardiospectra is probably the most conspicuous. And actually, there have been a few. I don't have the names to roll off the top of my tongue here, sorry. But a few companies that have been in the application process and have not made the TIF award because they got acquired or bought out and they didn't need the money. There have been a few that have been approved and didn't accept the money. That's success for the ETF, it really is. The Cardiospectra, though, that was a collaboration between, I think, UT Austin and Health Science Center San Antonio, that ETF put in $1.25 million, and 15 months later, I think it was, something like that, I've got that somewhere, it was bought out by Volcano Corporation, yeah, for $25 million in cash. That was a many multiples of the ETF investment. So they've done well. They've only had one company fail. But it's early. If they don't have failures, they're not taking enough risk.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so now we've answered Jerry McGuire's question of where's the money. And we need to move on. One last thing, but what I will do is, I'm going to flash this. I found that when you come to the Valley, the part of the culture in the business world is you always wear your company or your organization name on your shirt, on your sleeve, wherever it might be. So I decided I wasn't going to wear one of my ugly ties because it would detract. But I would put the Rapid Response Manufacturing Center label out front so that you know it's been talked about. I'm the director of it. Al Beck, sitting up there with a coffee cup in front of himself, is the field engineer over at the center. Janie Sands, that you met outside at the registration table, is lead administrative assistant at the center. So we're here. Also, if you are interested, there are some copies of a brochure out on one of the tables. I don't want you to walk away without having that choice. So now that we know how you get the money, we need to find out some experiences from some people that have been really trying to make this happen. So in this part of the afternoon, what we're going to do is we're going to hear a roundtable. It's going to be a small roundtable, but we will have two people here to talk about startup of new ventures. We're going to have Karen Lozano, who is an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering here at UTPA. Her general field is in the nanotechnology area, and she's one of the early ones to really bring some nanotechnology to the market, so we're quite pleased about that. And then David Watkins is here, and he's Chief Executive Officer of MPC Studios. They are involved in looking at website design and producing the good advertising for the technology startups, and something that good marketing and good advertising you just can't do without. So we will have presentations from them, and then we'll have our last session. Karen?
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me well if I go here? Can you hear me also? No? Okay. I'm just too hyper to stay in one place, so sometimes I walk around, but if you can't hear me, then I will try to stay in one place. So basically, I guess they asked me to, talk about it, and I think maybe Kathy should have talked after me, because I'm at the point of, what Kathy comes next, right? So now let's move back a little bit, like just pretend you haven't listened to Kathy, and then you're going to listen to what is that you go through to get to the point where then you need Kathy, right? So basically, I'm a professor in mechanical engineering, and I guess, oh, this one works? Okay. So that's my research area, and I like to, being at Pan Am and working mostly with undergraduates, you have to have a lot of opportunities for them, that they can get mentored, that they can get participation in state-of-the-art research. So my area doesn't focus in one little tiny area that I go and discover everything, in that particular area. I try to make myself as broad as possible so I can, reproduce or produce a lot of opportunities for my undergraduates. My team is about 17 undergraduate students per semester that do state-of-the-art research in the lab, about 6 master students and 2 postdocs, and there's several faculty members that help within that effort. So we try to do a lot of different areas. As a scientist, we develop a lot of research scientific publications that are not patentable, but at the same time, as an engineer, you're always trying to solve problems. So you try to, you encounter something within your area and you try to solve it. So what we were doing is that when we were working in sample preparation of the composites that we work with, we were trying to do some scaffolds for tissue regeneration, where basically you can, provide, let's say for skin, scaffolds that a lot of times, I guess the girls, when they think about mechanical engineering, they think about oil and getting dirty and being on their car. And, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I don't even know, where to change the oil of my car. I don't even know where, and when I was studying, I didn't have a car, so I didn't even know where to put the gas in a car, So it's nothing related to that, It's actually, learning how things work, the mechanical properties of many systems, like in this case, scaffolds for skin regeneration. Those scaffolds have to have good mechanical properties so they can withstand the weight of the cells, so they can withstand, the time that it needs for the cells to grow, and things like that. So that's one, of the, 15 projects that we're working on. And when we were working with that, we found that electrospinning was the only way to do it. So electrospinning is quite lengthy. You need like 30,000 volts to operate it. It's a batch process, just whatever you put in the syringe, and I'll show you a little bit about it. So we started thinking there must be another way to do it, and we need a little bit more and something that is cost efficient. We don't need to have a product that, cost me $100,000 just to have it in the lab, So we started thinking a little bit more and, form a little group of students and kind of, brainstorm, and brainstorm about it. And then we have wonderful Jackie that, she pushes us to protect, the intellectual. A lot of times we as professors, we say like, oh, yeah, great, we can publish it. So like, no, wait, you can't publish that. You need to protect it and, things like that. So I think, for an entrepreneur, you should be passionate about what you do. And a lot of times these type of activities come, I guess, as you're not really looking for that, you're not really looking for the money that is involved in, as Stephen Heightlander says, how much money can you get or how many patents. You're not really looking for that, but the passion that you have towards it brings it, naturally. And then you just have to have a nice team, So I can't, I'm passionate towards what I do, but, Jackie's been very instrumental in guiding me, And of course, there's many other people now that we're at this stage that, should we, jump the line? We already filed the provisional patent, and there was actually 4 provisional patents because the scope was so large that they couldn't do it in one. So I guess that's that line that we need to jump right now, and we need help from, I don't know, a lot of you, so if you have any ideas, we're willing to talk about it. So we were basically driven to solve a problem. The nanofibers, you can use nanofibers for many, many things. Drug delivery system, hygiene, nanocomposites as reinforcements for medical equipment, for, clothes, textiles, microfiltration, and, much more. And there's a big market for it. And right now it's the time, as Kathy was saying, timing, So right now is the time to explore more about nanofibers. But how is that we usually get those? So we get them through electrospinning processes. This is basically, how it works. So it's a syringe, and you apply a charge to the syringe, and you collect the fibers in a grounded collectors. So you can only spin, or spun, what you have in that syringe. And there's 2 companies that are now working on kind of making, commercial quantities or industrial quantities of this one through electrospinning. And what they basically do is they either put a lot of these ones in series, or they put one that is like a mandrel that rotates, but they have a lot of needles within that mandrel. And it's still the basic principle of electrospinning. So you still need like 30,000 volts to operate the system. And that one that has the mandrel that rotates costs like about $100K. And uses like about 5 meters by 4 meters. So you actually need real estate labs, so it has a lot of issues. So we said, no, we want something like as compact as this one, but that we can do, much more. So, we came up with a system that, I guess based on what Steve Highlander and Tamara and Jackie, we cannot present to you a lot of the, how it actually works, but at least you can see like somebody that is just starting up, how is it you come up with the idea, and if there's a good product that we have. So we have there, for example, fibers. That one's not, I guess, a very good one. But this one, for example, usually in electrospinning, you work with solutions. Your polymer or your plastic has to be in a solution in order to be able to, squeeze it out of the syringe. In our system, we can do melts, or we can do actual solids and melt it within the system, or we can do solutions. So this is polystyrene, usually polystyrene, or this one we work it out from melt spinning. And we created that math. And those fibers are the size of about between 200 to 300 nanometers. We're not talking really about the single-digit nanometers, where like the nanotubes, the carbon nanotubes or carbon nanofibers, or nanowires, gallium arsenide, and that basically are used for as a fiber itself, like a probe, or a cantilever. In this case, we're talking about between the size of 200 to 500 nanometers. We can still call them nanofibers, and from 500 to 1,000, we call them sub-micron size fiber. And then, single-digit micron. So that's the type of fibers that we're working with. And we can do any type of polymer. We can do several metals. We can do several ceramics. This is, for example, bismuth. And if you look at the size, the bar is 5 microns. So each one of them is about 500 nanometers. And it's very important, because bismuth is quite expensive. Like, we were trying to buy a gram just for comparison. And how much was it? Like $1,000 a gram, or? A gram. And in this one, we make them, like in 2 minutes we got it, and we pay like, $35 for the bulk bismuth, less than that. So, so there's, we have it, and we didn't, use a lot of time and effort to do it. This one is polyethylene oxide. A lot of the fibers in here are in the range of 200 nanometers. There's some, like that little one over there, that you can see, that is much less than 200. But, average size is like about 200. So when you do for microfiltration, they usually work in the single-digit micron, and they do have a variation, in size. So basically, that's the only picture that you will see of our little tiny baby. This is very, you can do both melts spinning, you can do, industrial scale production, size control, from micron to nanoscale. It's very simple to operate. It's basically operated by our undergraduate students. I have never actually gotten any fibers myself. It's my undergrad student, the one that gets all the fibers. It's very low voltage. You basically just need an outlet, the 120. You don't need to, reproduce any high voltage in there. It's very low cost, compact, research-minded, commercially, cool, be a disruptive technology. So, there's, I guess, before, I acknowledge all the kids that have worked in it. It's basically, we're now at the stage where we need, it's been already patented, provisionally patented, and we're now at the stage that we have to think about, moving forward. The investors, I guess I should say that we are the one proposal that got funded by the TIF. So Kathy mentioned that there was one from UTPA. Is this one the one that got the 50K? So we basically got our first, I guess, seed money. What we're working right now is basically on, the product quality and speed to market. I feel very confident when I do something and I, find a little tiny sample that I know it behaves this way, and I can publish that in, a scientific article. But when I'm thinking that I'm going to be selling one of this one to many different people, and then, you just have to be extremely careful, and, so I become a little bit paranoid. So that money, the one that we get, is the one that is going to let us do all the do like 2 or 3 different ones, test them day and night, I'll do a lot of different testing to improve, our existing prototype, make it nice and beautiful. If I give you a mouse that has, that works, but it only has the inside, and I tell you, well, you need to connect these 2 cables to make it work, you're not gonna like it, so we need to do also some type of marketing thing, make the cover, make it look beautiful, put a little logo there, all the, the things that will make it look safe and beautiful. And that's where we are right now. So Jackie, this could be a very good opportunity for a company to get established in the Valley. It could probably certainly generate jobs, and, so that's something that for that I will need a team, and I will be able to get coached, and, I'm just willing to learn a lot of that. And I guess, the acknowledgement, there's 2 professors that are involved in this development of Dr. Sarkar, that's sitting over there, Dr. Vasquez, and then all the other ones are undergraduate students. So we have Michael that is graduating in 2 weeks, Eugenio, Chris, Andres, Saida, Jorge, and Im. I guess UTPA for, providing the funds for the patent, the expensive provisional patent, and Jackie for all the help, and now, the UT system for the TIF grant. So I guess from that, I basically said questions, we can talk scientifically about it, we can talk about, but basically at this point I would like comments or suggestions, or, because we're right at the beginning. That's fine with me.
Question seated at the table here with the microphone, we'll be in good shape.
Good afternoon. I'm David Watkins, and I am from MPC Studios. Our headquarters is in Harlingen, Texas, and it's exciting to follow a presentation about all this scientific stuff going on because I was just coming, one of the perks of my job is I get to travel to 2 or 3 expos a year, and I just came back from Las Vegas, a technology convention, and they had a beautiful swimming pool, and I was down there having a nice beverage, and a couple of the guys from the expo came out and got in the hot tub there next to me, and one of them goes, "Hello? Yeah, baby, I'll be up in a minute." And I thought, "You have one of those Bluetooths?" And he said, "No, it's one of those implant phones." Okay. And the guy next to me goes, "Oh, yeah. Guys, I got to take off. Somebody's texting me." I said, "What do you mean texting you?" He goes, "Yeah, I have one of those implant text devices here on my screen." So, not to be outdone, I excused myself for a moment, and I came back, and one of the guys says, "Dave, you've got some toilet tissue coming out of your swimming trunks there, dragging about 8 feet." And I said, "No, sir, I'm receiving a fax." I think one of the biggest failures I've had as a business person is to underestimate what can go wrong. And I've learned, my background is 10 years as a radio DJ and 6 years as a school teacher and a television producer over at Channel 4. And so I don't have any business background. This is our 11th year now, and I have learned the hard way through the money pouring out of your wallet way. And definition is come to be my best friend. And I apply it to every project we work on. And early in the process, I try to convince people the most important thing you can do to make this project successful is to define it early on. "Oh, well, yeah, but let's just put we were going to sell 6 or 7 products. Let's build it, and then we'll tweak it as we go along." And it doesn't work that way. It never has worked that way. I've seen it 50 times probably try to be crammed that way, and it doesn't work that way. What does work is defining a process and then following it, and then refining that process as you see ways to make it better. And in our case, it's website development or application development, which is becoming more important to us, or the creation of branding campaigns and strategies to spend a big annual budget for marketing. And before we spend any money, I like to have everything possible defined. What are we going to do in January? What are we going to do in February? Not just a list, but all right, billboards. How many billboards? Where are they going to go? How much are they going to cost? Recently, this year, I had an experiment that wound up being very expensive. The experiment started as a cost-saving measure to change our telephones to VoIP. We were going to save so much money changing to VoIP, voice over internet. And we bought new telephones and put in a new system, and gosh, everything seems to always look better on paper than it does in reality. So this last week we migrated back to regular telephones because the VoIP never did satisfy. There was always something wrong. That's my failure. That's a failure of lack of looking ahead of what might go wrong. Another project, we decided to dabble in installing network infrastructure into businesses. Going in, evaluating their existing network and figuring out, all right, we'll bring in these servers and connect you'll have enough people, 20 people can be connected. It'll be great. And we did 3 networks before I stopped that business model because there's a reason why there's not a lot of networking companies around. It's way more difficult in practice than it is on paper. And so definition is what I would encourage you in your process early on. Spend more time than you're comfortable defining every aspect of where you're headed, who your target is, what the cost breakdowns are. I love spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets because spreadsheets are the only ones who don't lie to me. And the reason why is because if I don't lie to the spreadsheet, it won't lie to me. And that's the key. You know, I have to not lie to it. I have to be truthful. So I like to run what-if scenarios. And if you err on the side of caution, you'll be much more likely to have a success. I've been a multimillionaire many times on a spreadsheet until I altered the numbers. We recently migrated at our company this year to a ROWE program, R-O-W-E, and that's an acronym for Results Only Work Environment. And although it was challenging, it's something I would recommend you to consider looking into with your business because it changes the whole dynamics of what work is. Right now, this is an example of ROWE. I'm on a Saturday afternoon, I'm doing something for the university, but on behalf of my company. There are no more work schedules, there are no more work days, there are no more holidays, there are only results. And again, back to definition, it's easy to say, hey, we're going to be a results-only company, but what does that mean? How do I measure whether or not you're achieving your results or not? So that was the most difficult part of the migration process, was defining what everyone's expectations were. The amazing thing is that people work harder under this new program than they did when they had to show up at 8:30 on Monday morning and got to leave at 5:30 on Monday afternoon, because there are no work schedules. Somebody has to answer the phone. That's 2 or 3 different people have that as part of their ROWE responsibility. So I don't care where you are or what's going on, somebody has to be answering the phone during regular business hours because the rest of the world is still on business. But as long as all of the goals are being met, as long as there are no fires, as long as nobody's slacking and letting things pass by with excuses, then the results are being met. And the motivation, the morale, the enthusiasm for the workplace, the ideas that are coming forward, and more importantly, the collaboration that's taking place. And I use iPhone pretty religiously now. I like it. I would recommend it, even if you're a BlackBerry fan. The tools that are available, Google has just the most wonderful set of collaboration tools, not just Gmail, but the ability to share and collaborate with documents, to share and collaborate schedules on your calendar. There are so many internet-based tools now, and a little bit of research will allow you to find many of them are free, many of them are low cost, and to be able to collaborate with somebody who's in Chicago or Mumbai or La Feria, and I'm in McAllen, but I see them. They're on my laptop. Everyone in our company uses webcams. We all have, first thing we do is get on our Google accounts, and there's the G-Talk and little cameras next to everybody who's online. If I ever want to talk to Kate, even if she's in the office 25 feet from me, I'll click on the G-Talk and say, hey, Kate. She's right there. You know, now we can meet up and get together, but it's as if she's right there in my office when I just click on the button. And so these are the things that are happening around us right now, really fast. It's changing every day. And that's the last thing I'm going to talk on is that the only consistency that I have discovered in the last 11 years with this business is change. And I think everything is clear, and we got a clear roadmap for the next 5 years. Everything's solid. And a year from now, I realize that my plans are obsolete. This isn't going to work. We have to make some changes. And it is always painful. It gets less painful the more times you make change. But embrace it, because what's funny is you struggle and worry, and then you make the change, and within a few days or a few weeks, you're like, God, why did we make that so hard? And we had such a hard time making that change, and every time, it's for the better. And with change, the changing world we have right now, the economy, there is opportunity. And with an open mind and a work ethic, surrounding yourselves with creative, intelligent, loyal people, and have fun, because good people won't stay if you don't have fun. So, thank you for letting me be here.
Karen, I'm glad Jackie here's also. Seems like you got some wonderful technology there, of course, with patents, an option for universities and for other technology-based entrepreneurs, of course, to license that technology to someone else rather than go with another product. How are you guys thinking about that?
That's a very good question, and can you hear me? Does it work? Yeah? Okay. The question, Dr. Sargent is asking that usually when you develop technology, do you want to license out the technology to somebody, to a bigger company, or you want to start up a company? And that's why in my first page, I have a new startup, and I had like many question marks. That's something that Jackie and I and Kyle and Dr. Sarkar have been discussing. There are different things and that, I guess that they're positive and negative, of each one, pros and cons. And I guess at this point, we want to make the technology, refine the prototype and the proof of concept and make it just as pretty as we can do it. And then, and in the meantime, we're trying to take the decision. For me, like 2 years ago, my husband and I started a company, and we were doing very, very good. But my kids, it was taking a toll on my kids. I have 2 little kids right now, and it was hard for them. Even right now, my son said, it must be really hard to go to Panama on Saturday, so my little one. So, so there are many things that you have to balance. But I certainly believe that if we have a team, Jackie's been saying that there's people that, could, be very good at, different positions. And I believe that for the Valley, it would be very good if we do a startup, because we develop high-tech jobs and we, motivate the economy and, do a little bit. At least we'll maybe have a place where we can hire our own students. Our engineering students, most of them leave the Valley. Most of our engineering students can't stay here because there's no jobs for them. Our dean is here, and he can probably say, that that's correct. So at least, we could hire some of our own graduates. But I guess, I don't know, I guess that will be something that we'll have to, come up with, like, within now and 6 months to basically decide that the TIF is for 1 year, and, but that decision we'll have to make it between now and 6 months. But it will basically be for personal, what is that you actually have that energy and what is that you want to pursue. And if we create a very good team, then I have no problem, to still, work or I guess consult for the company and try to see what's the next, always looking for what's the next thing, what other type of fibers can we make, what other type of systems can we work with. But it depends. Jackie I don't know if Jackie wants to add something.
I'll just make one quick comment. One of the things that we're trying to do is offer options to our inventors. We certainly don't want to encourage someone to start a company who does not have the passion around it, because it will not be successful. And I think Karen will say her passion has been tempered since the beginning as the realities of what this would mean have occurred. I think Dr. Sarkar would say his passions have been somewhat tempered too, and they're kind of looking through the possibilities. But we're also, besides the proof of concept, a big part of the money for that Karen and Sarkar and Dr. Vasquez are going to be using is for the commercialization strategy. And of course, one piece is licensing that, but the probability of that license being able to be used in a company in the Valley is lower if we do not start it ourselves. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just add something to that? From the perspective that I see,
Okay.
It's not always the best idea, in fact, it's often not the best idea to have the scientist, the inventor, be the CEO. In fact, it usually is not.
Yeah, no.
So those considerations can sometimes often be mitigated by taking a chief scientific advisor role, in which case you are thinking about product development and the next things, and letting someone else do the actual business spin-off. In fact, CEOs of startups don't stay with serial entrepreneurs. Take someone else to get it through another phase of the program.
What Kathy commented on is about lots of times that people who are inventors, especially who are technology inventors and who love being educators, do not necessarily want to pursue becoming an entrepreneur of a technology startup, which would be demanding and take them away from their teaching and research passions. So there are things, we're learning about, like Karen and I and the whole group are learning about things like Rent a CEO and different groups that are available where we can find experienced entrepreneurs who are able to give us advice about the process. And of course, also, we look internally to other people who are experienced in the university and the community for that kind of advice too. But the goal is to try to help build technology-based economic development in the region.
I actually did want to ask David, your background seems very interesting with having done radio and teaching before you got into your current business. What made you make that jump into?
I was a lost child, and it was 10 years of travel and fun, and then 6 years of trying to settle down, and then 1998 there were a lot of changes in my family. Lost my father, and that was it's a strange how sometimes tragedy is opportunity, because I didn't want to lose my father, but it was the inheritance that I received that allowed me to invest in the startup of this business. And so and with the whole timing, the internet just taking off, I had been dabbling in a technology program at Harlingen South. You know, the first computers with a gigabyte hard drive. I remember the first 4 gigabyte hard drive. We paid $2,500 for it, and I got a 16 gigabyte keychain with me right now. You know, so. But no, the Valley's been very, very good, and I think that there is a lot of opportunity for businesses to succeed down here, because the lack of competition and the willingness of the workforce, I think, to jump on board with new ideas. The Ramiro here earlier with the EDCs, many of the EDCs have helped our company out a lot, and in collaborative projects, and I just think the Valley is a great place to be. I call it the Kmart version of Maui, where I did live for a few years. It's not quite as nice, but it has the same texture and feel, and it costs a whole lot less to live here than Maui. So.
David, with having some personal insight into your startup experience, I think I can answer John's question in a more honest fashion.
Okay.
You were just
That's true. I was not a good teacher. I knew it was start a business or a new career one way or another. So. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that. Kyle's being ugly because I gave him a D- on his semester final when he was my student. So.
Oh, okay. Next question.
If I can interpret your question a little bit differently, is why can't we get businesses down here who want to pay money for our services? And it is one of those challenges, but I call it the numbers game. And if you think it's hard now in 1998 to get somebody to spend more than $1,000 for something dealing with the internet, they thought you were crazy. This is a fad, and you know it's not going. Nobody uses the internets, all right. So I think that you have to build value by focusing on return on investment. I have Arts Trucks is a great example, a wonderful client of ours. They invested a lot of money into their website that they recouped in the first 90 days by sales to Ireland and Argentina and Israel. That they'd never been able to do that before. So I think you have to focus on return on investments. I find it amazing that there's multi-million-dollar companies that don't want to spend more than $5,000 for the single most important aspect of their entire marketing arsenal. You know, their website is critical, and sometimes you have to go in there and lay it down. You know, how important is this? Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to get back out of it. If a company thinks they're going to spend $100,000 on a website and you can show them that they're going to make $600,000 the first year, well, I guess they're not spending anything, are they? You know, they're making $500,000 out of left field. And if people understand that, then it'll be easier for you to sell, especially if you go in there with an organized plan of action and can justify your position. But the thing my favorite word, and Matt has heard me say this a few times, my favorite word is next, because some people you're not going to convince. You're not going to change their mind. They're not going to part with the money. So you go on to the next one, because there are plenty of businesses looking for good work in the web area. So sorry for the ramble.
Other questions? Up there, yes.
I had 3 credit cards, 8 acres of land, a rental house, a 401k plan, and $25,000 of inheritance. And it took 5 years before we made a profit. So hard work, sacrifice, beans and rice.
Yeah, the question was, how did you finance it to begin with? Other questions? Go ahead.
I love that question. The question was, what do we do to help keep the team stay together and motivated and excited about working there? And I didn't mean to make it sound like we have romper room or that it's some sort of clubhouse. We have fun, but we work. Everybody works. And when you're measuring results, it's kind of easy to see who's really working and who's not working. Because when you're on a 40-hour-a-week, 8:30 to 5:30, working is, well, he's sitting in the chair and the computer's on, he's got the mouse in his hand, he must be working. And that's not a result. So around our place, every morning at 11 o'clock, we have a collaborative team meeting. For those people who aren't in, we stream the meeting live over the internet, and they are allowed to view at home, and they're also Skyped in so that when it's their turn to say what they're working on that day or they have coming up or any fires. So we have daily team collaboration. Short and to the point. We try to keep the entire meeting 20 minutes or so, and it's in and out. And everybody is always aware of what's going on. I think that's really important. I think it's important to be honest about problems that you're having. If you have a problem customer, or if there's if you lost a big account, if there is uncertain times on the horizon, I think it's important to be open and honest about that, and not to create a sense of dire emergency or dread, but so that everyone is aware that, you know, look, if we lay off 2 people at the end of this month, it doesn't come out as a complete surprise, and then you focus on regrouping and getting back together and moving forward. But I like to try to maintain a real positive environment. Si se puede. You know, we say it every day, all the time. We didn't wait for Barack to say it first. We've been saying it for years. So.
I guess I can add a little bit more to that. I guess it's very important that whoever is in charge of the team shows enthusiasm to what you're doing. Like if they see the passion on the leader of the team, it goes, to the students. In my case, one of my passions is to promote Hispanics into higher education. Hispanics make, I don't know, 12% or how many of the population, but doctorate degrees, in Hispanics are less than 1% in science and engineering. For women, it's like point something 0.5 something. There's a weird specimen somewhere. So so we try to to promote that, and I've been very successful. Of all my students that work with me, at least 60% of them go to graduate school. So that's what I'm and the thing is to maintain a very positive environment and lots of hard work.
I love that point, because there was a time when I slacked off for a few months and my business went down because of it. You can't delegate leadership of the company unless you're going to get out of the way and let them run it. And if I'm going to be running the company, then I have to be there on a daily basis. I have to lead with passion and enthusiasm, and I like to demand excellence.
Yes.
And at the same time, everybody understands that the reason we're in business is to make a profit. And if you can't make a profit, then you're not going to have a job, you're not going to have a job, we're not going to be here next year, and much less your kids working here someday. So the only way you're going to make a profit is do excellent work, keep your clients, and recognize excellence. When somebody does an excellent job, praise them in front of everybody. Let them know what an excellent job. Everybody enjoys a pat on the back. And at the same time, I don't like the approach of kicking the trash can across the room when somebody messes up, but I do like the point of making sure they're aware they messed up, specifically, and what we could do next time to not have this thing happen, because there will always be a next time.
Any other questions? Matt?
You have a very talented team of folks. How did you find them, or how did
I'd say...
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, how did we find our fantastic team? And it's true. It's the best group of people I've ever worked with in my life. Half of them are former students of mine. They were at one time in my classroom at Harlingen South. And the other half are people who have responded to ads. We do a pretty thorough interview process, and when I mean thorough, we interview a lot of people until one of them feels right. And when one of them feels right, I'm a lot less concerned about their talent than I am, do they have talent that it can evolve? Do they have intelligence? And will they mesh well with our team? I've had prima donnas in the workplace. We don't do well with prima donnas. I am enough prima donna for the company. So everybody else just has to be able to work and collaborate well, and no tantrums, no drama. So that's really the thing I look for most when I'm interviewing people is this a drama queen? And if they're smart and they have a sense of humor and they look like they have a work ethic, anybody can make a good resume. So that's mostly how we just try to find people by vibe. And if they've got good skills, then that's important, of course, but that's not the only criteria.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit to that, like the students that work in the research group, a lot of times they ask me if they need to be seniors, to join the research group. And I said, or the freshmen, when they come, it's like, I would like to work in nanotechnology, what do I need to know? It's like, do you have good work ethics? Are you a responsible student? Okay, you can join the group, And then, some of them stay 4 years, and then they stay 2 years for the master. So by the time they graduate, they basically did a PhD thesis, But it's basically the work ethics. If they have good work ethics, you're welcome. And you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to learn from those mistakes. And the more mistakes that you do, the more that you learn. And here, we're not losing money, but we lose credibility, So what I do is like, okay, you make mistake, you need to learn. You don't learn from it, you're out. And I tell them, you're going to leave my group with your ears hanging all the way to here. Because I'll be pulling your ears, and I'm sorry, sometimes you're not going to like me, but I will make sure that you graduate with very, very good credentials. And the team, I don't think you hire the the smartest guys. In my team, I have kids that are 2.7 GPA. You don't hire the smartest, but you try to make them very smart. And you work with them, and they get aligned with the team. So a lot of times when they're slacking, I tend to hire somebody that I know is going to live in the lab, and the other ones feel bad that they're not there, so then they start pulling them together. So sometimes it's not the brightest people, the ones that make, they become bright, but if they work in a nice, positive environment.
I guess I would add that if all of this is working, like you both have discussed, I guess the two words that I would sum it up in is have fun.
Yes.
And that's the bottom line. If you're having fun, you can be very productive. So, are there any last questions? We got one up here that you could. Yeah.
It's interesting, we had four case companies here before. MIT. MIT specializes in kind of actively doing research, going on startup companies, over 100 startup companies plus the last 13 years. If this company actually works out that you're talking about, I think we would be the first startup that that's an entirely different thing to do. Here at Penn Am, where we don't have that.
Yes, it's been very hard at Penn Am. Doing research at Penn Am, it's been very hard, and my dean knows it, I've been having, when I graduated from Rice University, so it's you do research there, right? So I came to Penn Am, and my passion has always been on research and education, And I've been the guinea pig for every single thing that you can imagine, with purchasing, hiring a postdoc. Penn Am had never hired a postdoc before until I hired one. Basically, I sat one day in Dr. Lemaster's office and I said, either I have a postdoc next week in my office or I return the money to National Science Foundation. So, I've been having all kinds of issues. So I guess this is a new wall that, we're probably ready to, nail down if we have to. But now we have, Jackie, and Jackie understands all the pressures and stuff. But if we can do it and open up the door for somebody else, that would probably be good. But of course, we will need to, load with some energy because you need to deal with the bureaucracy of the administration. I tell my people, when I'm in this building, I'm the happiest person on earth. I work great, my lab moves forward, we send out publications, my students get motivated, but as soon as I walk to that side of the university, there's all kinds of issues, that we have to deal with.
Last.
May I ask, I'll just comment.
Question.
There are actually two companies that we have, neither one of them. One of them is not a technology base, the other one is technology we co-owned with University of Notre Dame and University of Iowa, and the company startup is in Iowa, not here, and that's why we're really focused on trying to figure out how to make it be here. And the second one is not a technology, well, it's copyrighted technology, but it was a company called Green Queen Productions, which is supporting the filmmaking that's going on. So we have two.
Last question up here.
The question was, did I use bootstrap financing, and did I use a business plan, and did I follow that plan? I used bootstrap financing. I would call it a midlife crisis, and I did not use a business plan, and I did not follow a business plan. And I think that the moment, once I had liquidated my assets and found myself deeply in debt, I think I started focusing on things like business plans. And that's why I started my presentation with the concept of definition really being important.
And your question was if I didn't hear what. If we had done a market assessment for the product that we got the money for, yes, we have I guess we have done some of it, like basically what is that they could be used for, how many machines can you sell, what the competitors are doing, what's the price of the competitors, what is it the competitor can do, that in this case there's mainly two companies that are, besides, electrospinning, and yes, we have done that. What resources?
What resources did you use to do the market assessment?
Well, Kyle, where's Kyle? Kyle did, you got it from where to get all the
What resources did you use to do your market assessment, Kyle?
How did you get the information from El Marco? You down?
Yeah, well, most of it was secondary information. Looking at the patents and find certain areas where the research is done, and then you can find tapping into different research, things like that.
You got an economic profile.
We ended up buying
You bought it?
market research.
Yeah, they bought it. Market research report from Textiles Intelligence. Okay, yes. And okay, he analyzed the data. But maybe mainly me and Dr. Sarkar, we did. Where is the application? Where are we gonna put it? What's the market of those? Areas? And Kyle was the one. Kyle and Jackie were the ones that did the economic analysis of the competitors.
Okay, thank you very much, and let's thank our two budding entrepreneurs. Okay, our final speaker for the afternoon is none other than Dr. Gonzalez, and the question that he wants to ask is, opportunity knocks, can you hear it?
My dad always told me never stand between a crowd and lunch or a crowd in a parking lot, and here we are. Anyway, many believe that, I think, that they can tell with a high degree of certainty and accuracy what the difference between the next greatest breakthrough and just a neat idea is going to be. And I say to myself, if I could do that, I would bottle it and sell it and make a lot more money than I'm making now. That's for sure. Nevertheless, opportunity does call. Do you hear it? Whoops, is this thing working? Okay, so if you do indeed hear opportunity, you need to make sure, as we have talked about and throughout the day today, that it's indeed opportunity, and that it's not the entrepreneurial mermaid leading you to failure. And she's not Disney's Little Mermaid. She's mean and ugly, and can lead you in a bad path. So how can we avoid the call of the mermaid as entrepreneurs? There's basically 3 traits that we really should have in order to do this, and they've been discussed in great detail throughout the day. So we're going to talk just a final to hammer down the ideas that we've talked about throughout the day as to how do you do this. Well, first you need to be intelligent, right? I don't think that there are a lot of unintelligent entrepreneurs out there. They might be unintelligent for a while, but they won't be entrepreneurs for long. You have to realize when it's time to start over again, either with a new project or revamping your current project. And you have to distinguish between opportunities and bum steers. Stay within the law, obviously, is a very big thing if you're intelligent, especially if you're financed in terms of your financing options. You need to be focused. We talked about the plan, and some people said, well, no, you don't need the plan. Yes, you do need a plan. The fact of the matter is you do need a plan to stay focused, be unique, and stick to it until you succeed. The next, and we heard this a lot, is the concept of being passionate. Okay, passionate, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And it's like that with any vocation that you take up. If you're not passionate, you're not really involved with it. So the difference between being passionate and being involved, because there are a lot of people that are involved in a business. But how do you tell the difference between this? Well, the way I like to tell this is we look at the roles played in the ham and egg breakfast. And this shows the concept of, or the meaning of being passionate quite well. Generally in the ham and egg breakfast, who are the role players in the ham and egg breakfast? Well, we obviously have the chicken, and then we have the pig, okay? And let's look at the roles of these two. If you look at this, really the chicken is involved, but the pig, he's really passionate about that breakfast. So, you really need to be like the pig in the ham and egg breakfast to show that you're really passionate about what you're doing. And in some cases, it does get to be that way. Anyway, so it's obvious that we don't want to hear the mermaid calling, and it can only get you in trouble and lead you to enterprise failure, sometimes even jail time if you're not careful. So I'm going to tell you, or we're going to discuss a little bit, 4 of my favorite entrepreneurial mermaid hits, and we heard about these throughout the day. So you might take these as our final advice. The first hit number 4 is, I don't need no business plan because I have a great elevator pitch. I think that we all know that startups generally fail by failing to plan, and blah, blah, blah is not going to get you very far, okay? Your probability of success is obviously best when you have a solid plan. Hit number 3, it's let's grow beyond our means to keep up with the Joneses. You know, we see this a lot in startup companies where they start up with plush offices that they can't afford to keep up, big cars, corporate jets, on and on. So really don't be sure that you don't take on more business that you're able to handle. And you can't, you need to make sure that your customers understand your limits. You only look foolish in the end if you don't do this. Hit number 2, the well is dry. Where did my money go? No, you can't take, excuse me. Get yourself the best accountant that you can afford and talk with him often. Don't think that, well, it's tax time, it's time to go talk to the accountant. You talk to him often and make sure that you stay on track. And from experience as a CEO in a company, there's nothing worse than not being able to make payroll, especially around the holidays. And the number 1 hit, marketing schmarketing. How are you going to reach your customers? If cold calling is your marketing plan, you really can't expect to do anything else, like actually running your business. So of course there are many more, and being that I very much follow what my father told me many years ago, in closing, I just want to leave you with a few more thoughts based on life's experiences. And first, that there's no cookbook way to be a technology-based entrepreneur. There are guidelines, and you heard many of those today. You have to find your own way to success. It's not easy, yet it's not impossible. Being a technology-based entrepreneur can be exciting, but it doesn't necessarily lead to riches. It's a calling like the priesthood or being a teacher. You need to know what you're doing, And like the pig, you have to be passionate. Finally, the country does need more, certainly our region does need more technology-based entrepreneurs to make a difference by providing jobs for people. As a matter of fact, the biggest passion that entrepreneurs are supposed to have is creating jobs. And so do you hear the call? Opportunity does call. Are you willing to heed the call and make a difference for your community, your country, the world, and obviously yourself? If you want to be a technology-based entrepreneur, we indeed want to support your efforts. That's why we're having this event. And we're going to have more like this, and we're here to help at the Rapid Response Center at the university. So without further ado, and finally, I want to say to our organizing committee and staff, our event sponsors, and to all of you participants, thank you very much for being here, and we hope to see you at the next one. I don't think, well, if they have any questions.
If you haven't turned in your evaluations, please do so.